sphere. For a long time, the horizon had been a monotonous, flat blue line separating the Pacific Ocean from the sky. The Navy helicopter raced forward, flying low near the waves. Despite the noise and the thumping vibration of the blades, Norman Johnson fell asleep. He was tired. He'd been traveling on various military aircraft for more than 14 hours. It was not the kind of thing a 53-year-old professor of psychology was used to. He had no idea how long he slept. When he awoke, he saw that the horizon was still flat. There were white semicircles of coral atolls ahead. He said over the intercom, "What's this?"
"Islands of Ninihina and Tafahi," the pilot said. "Technically part of Tonga, but they're uninhabited. Good sleep?"
"Not bad." Norman looked at the islands as they flashed by, a curve of white sand, a few palm trees, and gone. The flat ocean again.
"Where'd they bring you in from?"
the pilot asked. "San Diego. I left yesterday."
"So you came Honolulu, Guam, Pago here?"
"That's right."
"Long trip,"
the pilot said.
"What kind of work you do, sir?"
"I'm a psychologist," Norman said.
"A shrink, huh?"
The pilot grinned.
"Why not? They've called in just about everything else."
"How do you mean?"
"We've been ferrying people out of Guam for the last 2 days. Physicists, biologists, mathematicians, you name it. Everybody been flown in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean."
"What's going on?" Norman said. The pilot glanced at him, eyes unreadable behind dark aviator sunglasses.
"They're not telling us anything, sir. What about you? What'd they tell you?"
"They told me," Norman said, "that there was an airplane crash."
"Uh-huh,"
the pilot said.
"You get called on crashes?"
"I have been, yes." For a decade, Norman Johnson had been on the list of FAA crash site teams, experts called on short notice to investigate civilian air disasters. The first time had been at the United Airlines crash in San Diego in 1976. Then he had been called to Chicago in 78 and Dallas in 82. Each time, the pattern was the same. The hurried telephone call, frantic packing, the absence for a week or more. This time, his wife, Ellen, had been annoyed because he was called away on July 1st, which meant he would miss their July 4th beach barbecue. Then, too, Tim was coming back from his sophomore year at Chicago on his way to a summer job in the Cascades. And Amy, now 16, was just back from Andover. And Amy and Ellen didn't get along very well if Norman wasn't there to mediate. The Volvo was making noises again, and it was possible Norman might miss his mother's birthday the following week. "What crash is it?" Ellen had said. "I haven't heard about any crash." She turned on the radio while he packed. There was no news on the radio of an airline crash. When the car pulled up in front of his house, Norman had been surprised to see it was a Navy pool sedan with a uniformed Navy driver. "They never sent a Navy car the other times," Ellen said, following him down the stairs to the front door. "Is this a military crash?" "I don't know," he said. "When will you be back?" He kissed her. "I'll call you," he said. "Promise." But he hadn't called. Everyone had been polite and pleasant, but they had kept him away from telephones. "How much longer until we get there?" Norman asked.
"Any minute now, sir."
After 2 hours of monotony, the cluster of ships appeared unusually interesting. There were more than a dozen vessels of various kinds, formed roughly into concentric circles. On the outer perimeter, he counted 8 gray Navy destroyers. Closer to the center were large ships that had wide-spaced double hulls and looked like floating dry docks. Then nondescript boxy ships with flat helicopter decks. And in the center, amid all the gray, 2 white ships, each with a flat pad and a bullseye. "All this for an airplane crash?" Norman said.
"Hey,"
the pilot grinned.
"I never mentioned a crash. Check your seatbelt if you would, sir. We're about to land."
Captain Barnes was one of those trim military men who made Norman feel fat and inadequate. In his middle 40s, Hal Barnes had erect military bearing, an alert expression, short hair, a flat gut, and a politician's firm handshake.
"Welcome aboard the Hawes, Dr. Johnson. How are you feeling?"
"Tired," Norman said.
I'm sure. The men who picked you up in San Diego, the men who flew you out here, the men in Guam, what did they tell you?"
"They didn't tell me anything."
"And did you see any reporters, any press?"
"No, nothing like that." Barnes smiled.
"Good.
I'm glad to hear it. He waved Norman to a seat. Norman sat gratefully. How about some coffee? In my job, Dr. Johnson, security is the biggest worry, especially on a thing like this. If word gets out about this site, we'll have all kinds of problems. Norman still couldn't put it together. Why the secrecy? Well, Barnes said, we don't have all the facts yet. The crash occurred in the ocean? Yes, more or less directly beneath us as we sit here. And there can't be any survivors. Survivors? Barnes looked surprised. No, I wouldn't think so. And why was I called here? Barnes looked blank. Well, Norman explained, I'm usually called to crash sites when there are survivors. That's why they put a psychologist on the team, to deal with the acute traumatic problems of surviving passengers, or sometimes the relatives of surviving passengers. Their feelings, their guilt and their fears, and their recurring nightmares. Barnes was staring at him. He seemed uncomfortable. He shuffled the files around on his desk. Actually, this isn't an airplane crash site, Dr. Johnson. What is it? It's a spacecraft crash site. There was a short pause. Norman nodded. I see. That doesn't surprise you? Barnes said. No. As a matter of fact, it explains a lot. If a military spacecraft crashed in the ocean, that explains why I haven't heard anything about it on the radio. Why it was kept secret. Why I was brought here the way I was. When did it crash? Barnes hesitated just a fraction before answering. As best we can estimate, the spacecraft crashed 300 years ago. There was silence. Norman listened to the drone of the air conditioner. He heard faintly the radio communications in the next room. He looked at the mug of coffee in his hand, noticing a chip on the rim. He struggled to assimilate what he was being told, but his mind moved sluggishly in circles. Absolutely no question about it, Barnes was saying. We can estimate the date from coral growth with great accuracy. Pacific coral grows 2 centimeters a year, and the object, whatever it is covered in about 10 meters of coral. That's a lot of coral. Of course, coral doesn't grow at a depth of 1,000 feet, which means that the present shelf collapsed to a lower depth at some point in the past. The geologists are telling us that happened about a century ago, so we're assuming a total age for the craft of about 300 years. We could be wrong about that. It could, in fact, be much older. Could be 1,000 years old. Barnes shifted papers on his desk again, arranging them into neat stacks, lining up the edges. I don't mind telling you, Dr. Johnson, this thing scares the hell out of me. That's why you're here. Norman shook his head. I still don't understand. We brought you here, Barnes said, because of your association with the ULF project.
ULF stood for Unknown Life Forms. Back in 1979, when he was an assistant professor of psychology with a special interest in group dynamics and anxiety, Norman had been approached by the National Security Council. The government was conducting a study of how people might react in the event of an alien invasion, and they wanted Norman to write a proposal for a special investigation team whose task would be to meet with the aliens. No believer in extraterrestrials, Norman nevertheless agreed, for the project would give him the extra income he needed to buy a house. In his paper, classified top secret, he had recommended a team of 5, a zoologist, an astrophysicist, a mathematician, a linguist, and a psychologist. The role of the latter would be to study not the aliens, but the human group. Barnes told Norman now that his suggestions had been followed precisely with one exception. The linguist had been replaced by a marine biologist.
An ensign showed Norman to his room, tiny and gray, more like a prison cell than anything else. In the corner was a computer console and a keyboard. Next to it was a thick manual with a blue cover. He sat on the bed, which was hard, unwelcoming. He leaned back against a pipe on the wall. Hi, Norman, a soft voice said. I'm glad to see they dragged you into this. This is all your fault, isn't it? A woman stood in the doorway. Beth Halpern, the team zoologist, was a study in contrasts. She was a tall, angular woman of 36 who could be called pretty despite her sharp features and the almost masculine quality of her body. In the years since Norman had last seen her, she seemed to have emphasized her masculine side even more. Beth was a serious weightlifter and runner. The veins and muscles bulged at her neck and on her forearms, and her legs beneath her shorts were powerful. Her hair was cut short, hardly longer than a man's. Norman got up and she gave him a quick peck on the cheek. My room's next to yours. I heard you arrive. When did you get in? An hour ago. I think I'm still in shock, Norman said. Do you believe all this? Do you think it's real? I think that's real. She pointed to the blue manual next to his computer. Norman picked it up. Regulations governing personnel conduct during classified military operations. He thumbed through pages of dense legal text. It basically says, Beth said, that you keep your mouth shut or you spend a long time in military prison. And there's no calls in or out. Yes, Norman. I think it must be real. There's a spacecraft down there? There's something down there. It's pretty exciting. She began to speak more rapidly. Why, for biology alone, the possibilities are staggering. Everything we know about life comes from studying life on our own planet. But in a sense, all life on our planet is the same. Every living creature, from algae to human beings, is basically built on the same plan, from the same DNA. Now we may have a chance to contact life that is entirely different in every way. It's exciting, all right. And, well, it's only rumors so far. But your arrival seems to confirm them. What rumors? They're sending us down there, Beth said. Down where? To the bottom. To the spaceship. But it's 1,000 feet down. They're investigating it with robot submersibles. These days, 1,000 feet isn't that deep, Beth said. Their technology can handle it. There are Navy divers down there now, and the word is the divers have put up a habitat so our team can go down and live on the bottom for a week or so and open the spacecraft up. Norman felt a sudden chill. Working on a crash site team demanded the most extraordinary psychological vigilance to avoid being overwhelmed by what you saw. But there was never any personal danger, any physical risk. The risk was the risk of nightmares. But now, the prospect of going down 1,000 feet under the ocean to investigate a wreck. The ULF team met in the briefing room just before 11. Norman was interested to see the group he had picked 6 years before, now assembled together for the first time. Ted Fielding was compact, handsome, and still boyish at 40, at ease in shorts and a polo sports shirt. An astrophysicist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, in Pasadena, he had done important work on the planetary stratigraphy of Mercury and the Moon. Fielding's manner was open, cheerful, and pompous. At JPL, he had appeared on television whenever there was a spacecraft flyby, and thus enjoyed a certain celebrity. He had recently been remarried to a television weather reporter in Los Angeles. Ted liked showing off a photo of the red Corvette she had given him. Ted was a long-standing advocate for life on other worlds and a supporter of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which other scientists considered a waste of time and money. He grinned happily at Norman now. I always knew this would happen. Sooner or later, we'd get our proof of intelligent life on other worlds. Now, at last, we have it, Norman. This is a great moment. Norman hadn't seen Harry Adams, the reserved Princeton mathematician, for 6 years. Harry was a tall, very thin black man with wire-framed glasses and a perpetual frown. He wore a T-shirt that said, "Mathematicians do it correctly." It was the kind of thing a student would wear, and indeed, Adams appeared even younger than his 30 years. He was clearly the youngest member of the group, and arguably the most important. Many theorists argued that communication with extraterrestrials would prove impossible, because human beings would have nothing in common with them. These thinkers pointed out that just as human bodies represented the outcome of many evolutionary events, so did human thought. But the field of knowledge we were most likely to share with extraterrestrials was mathematics. So the team mathematician was going to play a crucial role. Norman had selected Adams because despite his youth, Harry had already made important contributions to several different fields. "What do you think about all this, Harry?" Norman said, dropping into a chair next to him. "I think it's perfectly clear," Harry said, "that it is a waste of time. This thing they found underwater? I don't know what it is, but I know what it isn't. It isn't a spacecraft from another civilization." Ted, standing nearby, turned away in annoyance. Harry and Ted had evidently had the same conversation already. Harry pulled out a sheet of paper. "There's a probability equation." He wrote out the letter P, followed by an equal symbol and a string of letters. "It means that the probability that intelligent life will evolve in any star system is a function of the probability that the star will have planets, the number of habitable planets, the probability that simple life will evolve on a habitable planet, the probability that intelligent life will evolve from simple life, and the probability that intelligent life will attempt interstellar communication within 5 billion years. That's all the equation says." "Uh-huh," Norman said. But the point is that we have no facts, Harry said. We must guess at every single one of these probabilities. And it's quite easy to guess one way, as Ted does, and conclude there are probably thousands of intelligent civilizations. It's equally easy to guess, as I do, that there's probably only one civilization, ours. He pushed the paper away. And in that case, whatever is down there is not from an alien civilization. So we're all wasting our time here. Harry, Ted said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in your philosophy. Norman looked over at the final member of the team, Arthur Levine, the marine biologist. Levine was the only person he didn't know. Pudgy man, Levine looked pale and uneasy, wrapped in his own thoughts. He was about to ask Levine what he thought when Captain Barnes strode in, a stack of files under his arm. Welcome to the middle of nowhere, Barnes said. And you can't even go to the bathroom. They all laughed nervously. Sorry to keep you waiting, but we don't have a lot of time, so let's get right down to it. If you'll kill the lights, we can begin.
The slides gave an abbreviated history of recent events. A communications crew laying cable for an underwater telephone line had been startled when their ship suddenly shuddered and their cable was cut. The Navy, fearing that the obstruction might be an enemy nuclear submarine, soon arrived on the site to make extensive studies. The object turned out to be a huge triangular fin, jutting 280 feet above the ocean floor. Tests showed that it was constructed of an alloy currently unknown to Earth technology. Attached to the fin, Barnes told his spellbound audience, was a long cylindrical object. Divers were at the site now looking for an entrance. The following day, mini-subs would take Norman and the 4 scientists down to investigate for themselves.
Metal clanged against metal. There was a sharp jolt, and then the motors cut off. Silence. Hissing air. The pilots scrambled to open the hatch, and surprisingly cold air washed down on them.
Airlock's open, gentlemen,
he said, stepping aside. Norman looked up through the lock. He saw banks of red lights above. He climbed up through the submarine and into a round steel cylinder approximately 8 feet in diameter. On all sides there were handholds, a narrow metal bench, the flowing heat lamps overhead, though they didn't seem to do much good. Ted, the astrophysicist, climbed up and sat on the bench opposite him. They were so close their knees touched. Below their feet, the pilot closed the hatch. They watched the wheel spin. They heard a clank as the submarine disengaged, then the whir of motors as it moved away. Several minutes later, there was a hiss and a side door slid open. Barnes stood there, with light jackets over his arm.
Welcome to DH-8, he said. You're the last to arrive. We just have time for a quick tour before we open the spacecraft.
He explained that the DH-8 habitat consisted of 5 large cylinders designated A to E.
Cell A is the airlock where we are now.
He led them into an adjacent changing room. Heavy cloth suits hung limply on the wall, alongside yellow sculpted helmets of the sort Norman had seen the divers wearing. The helmets had a futuristic look. They went on to Cell B, which housed power and life support systems. At first glance, it looked like a large boiler room, all multicolored pipes and utilitarian fittings.
This is where we generate all of our heat, power, and air, Barnes said. And that's Chief Petty Officer Fletcher, Teeny Fletcher.
Norman saw a big-boned figure working back among the pipes with a heavy wrench. The figure turned. Alice Fletcher gave them a grin, waved a greasy hand. They went into the next cylinder, the lights clicking on as they entered. Cylinder C contained living quarters, bunks, toilets, showers.
Plenty of hot water, you'll find.
Barnes showed them around proudly, as if it were a hotel. The living quarters were heavily insulated. Carpeted deck, walls, and ceilings all covered in soft, padded foam, which made the interior appear like an overstuffed couch. But despite the bright colors and the evident care and decoration, Norman still found it cramped and dreary. The portholes were tiny, and they revealed only the blackness of the ocean outside. And wherever the padding ended, he saw heavy bolts and heavy steel plating, a reminder of where they really were. He felt as if he were inside a large iron lung, and he thought, that isn't so far wrong. They ducked through narrow bulkheads into D-Cell, a small laboratory with benches and microscopes on the top level, a compact electronics unit on the level below.
This is Tina Chan,
Barnes said, introducing a very still woman. They all shook hands.
Be nice to Tina, Barnes was saying. She's our only link to the outside. She runs the comm ops and the sensor systems as well. In fact, all the electronics.
Next to Chan was another woman, Jane Edmonds, whom Barnes introduced as the unit archivist. "What's a unit archivist?" Ted asked her. "My mission is to keep all the digital recordings, visual materials, and videotapes, sir. Every aspect of this historic moment is being recorded, and I keep everything neatly filed." "Oh, excellent," Ted said. "I'm glad to hear it." They went on. The final cylinder, E-Sil, was more spacious than the others. There were magazines, a television, and a large lounge, and on the deck below was an efficient mess and a kitchen. Seaman Rose Levy, the cook, was a red-faced woman with a southern accent, standing beneath giant suction fans. She asked Norman whether he had any favorite desserts. "Desserts?" "Yes," said Dr. Johnson. "I like to make everybody's favorite dessert, if I can. What about you?" "Strawberry shortcake." "Easy. Got some nice New Zealand strawberries coming down on the last sub-shuttle. Maybe you'd like the shortcake tonight?" "And whipped cream?" Ted said. "Well, you can't have everything," Barnes said. "And one of the things you can't have at 30 atmospheres of mixed gas is whipped cream. Won't whip. Let's move on." Beth, the zoologist, and Harry, the mathematician, were waiting in the small, padded conference room directly above the mess. They both wore jumpsuits and heated jackets. Harry was shaking his head as they arrived. "Like our padded cell?" He poked the insulated walls. Norman looked around. "Where's Levine?" "Levine didn't make it," Barnes said briskly. "He got claustrophobic in the sub coming down and had to be taken back. One of those things." "Then we have no marine biologist?" "We'll manage without him." The intercom clicked and Tina Chan said, "Captain Barnes, we have a signal from the divers. They are mounting the airlock now, another few minutes to open." The feeling in the room changed immediately. The excitement was palpable. Ted rubbed his hands together. "I'll tell you," Beth said. "I can't help being nervous. Who knows what we'll find?" "We'll know soon enough," Ted said. The intercom clicked. "Captain Barnes, the divers have the airlock mounted in place. The robot is now ready to enter the spacecraft." "What robot?" Ted said. "I don't think that's appropriate at all. We came down here to make a manned entry into this alien spacecraft. I think we should do what we came here to do, make a manned entry." "Absolutely not," Barnes said. "We can't risk it." "I strongly object, Captain Barnes." "Duly noted," Barnes said, turning away. "Now let's get on with it. Tina, give us the video feed." The astrophysicist sputtered, but he fell silent as two large monitors in front of them clicked on. On the left screen, they saw the complex tubular metal scaffolding of the robot, with exposed motors and gears. The robot was positioned before the curved gray metal wall of the spacecraft. Within that wall was a door that looked rather like an airliner door. The second screen gave a closer view of the door, taken by the video camera mounted on the robot itself. "It's rather similar to an airplane door," Ted said. Norman glanced at Harry, who smiled enigmatically. Then he looked at Barnes. Barnes did not appear surprised. Barnes already knew about the door, he realized. Whirring, the robot claw extended out toward the panel. But the claw was clumsy. It scraped against the metal, leaving a series of gleaming scratches. But the panel remained closed. "Ridiculous," Ted said. "It's like watching a baby." The claw continued to scratch at the panel. "We should be doing this ourselves," Ted said. "Use suction," Barnes said. Another arm extended out with a rubber sucker. "Ah, the plumber's friend," Ted said disdainfully. As they watched the sucker attached to the panel, flattened, then with a click, the panel lifted open. At last. The view inside the panel was blurred, out of focus. They could distinguish what appeared to be a series of colored round metal protrusions, red, yellow, and blue. There were also intricate black and white symbols above the knobs. "Focus," Barnes called. "Focusing now, sir." The image became even more blurred. "No, the other way." "Yes, sir. Focusing now." The image changed, slowly resolved into sharp focus. "Uh-oh," Ted said, staring at the screen. They now saw that the blurred knobs were actually three colored buttons: yellow, red, and blue. The buttons were each an inch in diameter and had knurled or machined edges. The symbols above the buttons resolved sharply into a series of neatly stenciled labels. From left to right, the labels read, "Emergency Ready," "Emergency Lock," and "Emergency Open," in English. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then, very softly, Harry Adams began to laugh. "What's going on?" Ted said. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No," Harry said. He was calm, oddly detached. How could this spacecraft be 300 years old and carry instructions in modern English? Think about it, Harry said. Ted frowned. Maybe, he said, this alien spacecraft is somehow presenting itself to us in a way that will make us comfortable. Think about it some more, Harry said. There was a short silence. Well, if it is an alien spacecraft... It's not an alien spacecraft, Harry said. There was another silence. Then Ted said, well, why don't you just tell us all what it is, since you're so sure of yourself? All right, Harry said. It's an American spacecraft. An American spacecraft? Half a mile long? Made with technology we don't have yet? And buried for 300 years? It's from the future, Harry said. This is some kind of Earthcraft that will be made in the future, and has traveled backward in time, and appeared under our ocean several hundred years ago. Why would people in the future do that? Ted groaned. He was clearly unhappy to be deprived of his alien craft, his great historical moment. He slumped in a chair and stared dully at the monitor screens. I don't know why people in the future would do that, Harry said. We're not there yet. Maybe it was an accident, unintended. Let's go ahead and open it up, Barnes said. You know, Ted said thoughtfully, this is still a remarkable situation. In one sense, it's even more remarkable than contact with extraterrestrials. I was already quite certain that extraterrestrial life exists in the universe. But time travel? Frankly, as an astrophysicist, I had my doubts. From everything we know, it's impossible, contradicted by the laws of physics. And yet now we have proof that time travel is possible, and that our own species will do it in the future. Ted was smiling, wide-eyed and happy again. You had to admire him, Norman thought. He was so wonderfully irrepressible. And here we are, Ted said, on the threshold of our first contact with our species from the future. Think of it. We're going to meet ourselves from some future time. The probe pressed again and again without success. Sir, we cannot impact the button. I see that, Barnes said, standing up. Okay, shut it down and get it out of there. Ted, looks like you're going to get your wish after all. We'll have to go in and open it up manually. Let's suit up. They stood on a catwalk 5 feet wide, suspended high in the air. Norman shone his flashlight down. The beam glowed through 40 feet of darkness before it splashed on the lower hull. Surrounding them, dimly visible in the darkness, was a dense network of struts and girders. Beth said, it's like being in an oil refinery. She shone her light on one steel beam. Stenciled was AVR 09. All the stenciling was in English. Most of what you see is structural, Barnes said. Cross-stress bracing for the outer hull gives tremendous support along all axes. The ship is very ruggedly built, as we suspected, designed to take extraordinary stresses. There's probably another hull further in. Norman was reminded that Barnes had once been an aeronautical engineer. Not only that, Harry said, shining his light on the outer hull. Look at this. A layer of lead. Radiation shield? Must be. It's 6 inches thick. So this ship was built to handle a lot of radiation. A hell of a lot, Harry said. They followed the network of catwalks for 10 minutes more. Gradually, Norman could see that Barnes was right. There was a central cylinder constructed within the outer cylinder and held away from it by a dense arrangement of girders and supports, a spacecraft within a spacecraft. After 3 or 4 minutes, they arrived at the door on the inner hull. It looked like the outer door. Without waiting, Beth flipped up the panel of buttons, pressed open, and the door rumbled open. More darkness beyond. They stepped through. Norman felt softness underfoot. He shined his light down on beige carpeting. Their flashlights crisscrossed the room, revealing a large, contoured beige console with 3 high-backed, padded seats. The room was clearly built for human beings. Must be the bridge or the cockpit. But the curved consoles were completely blank. There was no instrumentation of any kind, and the seats were empty. They swung their beams back and forth in the darkness. Norman ran his hand over the smooth contours of the console. It was nicely molded, pleasant to feel. Norman pressed the surface, felt it bend to his touch. Rubbery again. Another new material. Norman's flashlight showed a few artifacts. Taped to the far end of the console was a hand-marked sign on a 3x5 filing card. It said, "Go, baby, go." Nearby was a small plastic statuette of a cute animal that looked like a purple squirrel. The base said, "Lucky Lamontina," whatever that meant. "These seats leather?"
Looks like it.
"Where are the damned controls?" Norman continued to poke at the blank console, and suddenly the beige console surface took on depth and appeared to contain instruments, screens. All the instrumentation was somehow within the surface of the console, like an optical illusion or a hologram. Norman read the lettering above the instruments. Pause thrusters, F3 piston booster, glider, sieves. "More new technology," Ted said. "Reminiscent of liquid crystals, but far superior. Some kind of advanced optoelectronics." Suddenly, all the console screens glowed red, and there was a beeping sound. Startled, Norman jumped back. The control panel was coming to life. "Watch it, everybody." A single bright lightning flash of intense white light filled the room, leaving a harsh afterimage. Another flash, and another, and then the ceiling lights came on, evenly illuminating the room. Norman saw startled, frightened faces. He sighed, exhaling slowly.
"How the hell did that happen?"
Barnes said. "It was me," Beth said. "I pushed this button."
"Let's not go around pushing buttons if you don't mind," Barnes said irritably.
It was marked room lights. It seemed an appropriate thing to do.
"Let's try to stay together on this. Just don't push any more buttons, Beth."
Everything about the room reminded Norman of an airplane cockpit. The 3 chairs for pilot, co-pilot, and navigator, the layout of the instrumentation. This was a machine that flew, he was sure of it. Yet something was odd. He slipped into one of the contoured chairs. The soft leather-like material was almost too comfortable. He heard a gurgling. Water inside?
"I hope you're not going to fly this sucker," Ted laughed.
No.
What's that whirring noise?
The chair gripped him. Norman had an instant of panic, feeling the chair move all around his body, squeezing his shoulders, wrapping around his hips. The leather padding slid around his head, covering his ears, drawing down over his forehead. He was sinking deeper, disappearing inside the chair itself, being swallowed up by it. And then the chair snapped forward, pulling up tight before the control console, and the whirring stopped. Then nothing. "I think," Beth said, "that the chair thinks you are going to fly it." Norman said, trying to control his breathing, his racing pulse. "I wonder how I get out." The only part of his body still free were his hands. He moved his fingers, felt a panel of buttons on the arms of the chair. He pressed one. The chair slid back, open like a soft clam, released him. Norman climbed out and looked back at the imprint of his body, slowly disappearing as the chair whirred and adjusted itself. Harry poked one of the leather pads experimentally, heard the gurgle.
"Water filled." "Makes perfect sense," Barnes said. "Water's not compressible. You can withstand enormous G-forces sitting in a chair like this."
"Aren't we forgetting something?" Beth said. "Where is everybody? If people flew this thing in either time or space, where are they?"
"Probably somewhere else on the ship." "I'm not so sure," Harry said. "Look at this leather on these seats. It's brand new."
"Maybe it was a new ship."
"No, I mean really brand new. This leather doesn't show any scratches, any cuts, any coffee cup spills or stains. There's nothing to suggest that these seats have ever been sat in."
"Maybe there wasn't any crew."
"Why would you have seats if there wasn't any crew?" "Maybe they took the crew out at the last minute. It seems they were worried about radiation. The inner hull's lead shielded too."
"I wonder where they sent it," Beth said.
"With time travel, you don't send it to a where, you send it to a when."
"Okay. Then to when did they send it?"
Harry shrugged. "No information yet," he said.
That diffidence again, Norman thought. What was Harry really thinking?
"Well, this craft is half a mile long," Barnes said. "We have a lot more to see."
"I wonder if they have a flight recorder," Norman said.
"You mean like a commercial airliner?"
"Yes.
"Something to record the activity of the ship on its voyage." "They must have," Harry said. "I'd like to see that recorder, too. In fact, I would say it is crucial."
Norman was looking at the console, lifting up a keyboard panel. "Look here," he said. "I found a date." They clustered around. There was a stamp in the plastic beneath the keyboard.
Intel Inc., made in USA. Serial number 980040778 8/5/43. August 5th, 2043? Looks like it. So we're walking through a ship 50-odd years before it's going to be built. This is giving me a headache. Look here. Beth had moved forward from the console deck into what looked like living quarters. There were 20 bunk beds. Crew of 20? It took 3 people to fly it. What were the other 17 for? Nobody had an answer to that. Next, they entered a large kitchen, a toilet, living quarters. Everything was new and sleekly designed, but recognizable for what it was. You know, Hal, this is a lot more comfortable than DH-8. Yes, maybe we should move in here. Absolutely not, Barnes said. We're studying this ship, not living in it. We've got a lot more work to do before we even begin to know what this is all about. It'd be more efficient to live here while we explore it. I don't want to live here, Harry said. Gives me the creeps. Me too, Beth said. They'd been aboard the ship for an hour now, and Norman's feet hurt. That was another thing he hadn't anticipated. While exploring a large spacecraft from the future, your feet could begin to hurt. But Barnes continued on.
In another room of the gigantic craft, they discovered storage compartments stacked with dried food. Yet another contained life support equipment and 20 spacesuits. Beth pushed another button, and a walkway began to move, carrying them effortlessly from one area to the next. Back at DH-8, they were mulling over the meaning of the mysterious craft when Barnes announced that he had just had news of a bad storm brewing on the surface. They would have to leave shortly, but first they were going to make another trip to the spaceship. This time the group split up. Barnes, Ted, and Edmonds continued their search of the craft, while Norman, Beth, and Harry stayed behind in the area they now called the flight deck, where they hoped to find a flight recorder. Eventually they found it, a glass cube inside of which was an intricate grid of wires. Beth accessed it by pushing buttons on the console. Among the data that appeared was a listing for Entry Event Summary. Beth pushed another button.
On the screen, a field of stars, and around the edges of the field, a lot of numbers. It was three-dimensional, giving the illusion of depth. Holographic? Not exactly, but similar. Several large magnitude stars there. Or planets. What planets? I don't know. This is one for Ted, Harry said. He may be able to identify the image. Let's go on. He touched the console. The screen changed. More stars. Yeah, and more numbers. The numbers around the edges of the screen were flickering, changing rapidly. The stars don't seem to be moving, but the numbers are changing. No, look, the stars are moving too. They could see that all the stars were moving away from the center of the screen, which was now black and empty. No stars in the center, and everything moving away, Harry said thoughtfully. The stars on the outside were moving very quickly, streaking outward. The black center was expanding. Why is it empty like that in the center, Harry? Beth said. I don't think it is empty. I can't see anything. No, but it's not empty. In just a minute we should see. There. A dense white cluster of stars suddenly appeared in the center of the screen. The cluster expanded as they watched. It was a strange effect, Norman thought. There was still a distinct black ring that expanded outward, with stars on the outside and on the inside. It felt as if they were flying through a giant black donut. My God, Harry said softly. You know what you are looking at? No, Beth said. What's that cluster of stars in the center? It's another universe. What? Well, okay, it's probably another universe. Or it might be a different region of our own universe. Nobody really knows for sure. What's the black donut, Norman said. It's not a donut. It's a black hole. What you are seeing is the recording made as this spacecraft went through a black hole and entered into another. Is someone calling? Harry turned, cocked his head. They fell silent, but heard nothing. What do you mean, another universe? Shh. A short silence, and then a faint voice crying. Hello? Who's that? Norman said, straining to listen. The voice was so soft, but it sounded human, and maybe more than one voice. It was coming from somewhere inside the spacecraft. Yoo-hoo! Anybody there? Hello? Oh, for God's sake, Beth said. It's them. On the monitor.
She turned up the volume on the little monitor Edmonds, the unit archivist, had left behind. On the screen, they saw Ted and Barnes standing in a room somewhere in the spaceship and shouting, "Hello? Hello?" Will he talk back? Yes, press that button on the side. Norman said, "We hear you." "High damn time," said Ted. "All right now," Barnes said. "Listen up. What are you people doing back there?" Ted said. "Listen up," Barnes said. He stepped to one side, revealing a piece of multicolored equipment. "We now know what this ship is for." "So do we," Harry said. "We do?" Beth and Norman said together. But Barnes wasn't listening. "And the ship seems to have picked up something on its travels." "Picked up something? What is it?" "I don't know," Barnes said, "but it's something alien." The moving walkway carried them past endless large cargo bays. They were going forward to join Barnes and Ted and Edmonds, and to see their alien discovery. Finally, they reached the end of the walkway. They passed through a midsection of struts and girders and entered a large forward room with ceilings nearly 100 feet high. You could put a 6-story building in this room, Norman thought. Looking up, he saw a hazy mist or fog. "What's that?" "That's a cloud," Barnes said, shaking his head. "A room is so big it apparently has its own weather. Maybe it even rains in here sometimes." The room was filled with machinery on an immense scale. At first glance, it looked like oversized earth-moving machinery, except it was brightly painted in primary colors, glistening with oil. Then Norman began to notice individual features. There were giant claw hands, enormously powerful arms, moving gear wheels, and an array of buckets and receptacles. "Where is your alien object?" Harry said. "Over here, Harry," Ted said to the mathematician with a wicked grin. "Let's see what your fabled powers of deduction make of this." They walked deeper into the room, moving among the giant hands and claws. And they saw, nestled in the padded claw of one hand, a large, perfectly polished silver sphere about 30 feet in diameter. The sphere had no markings or features of any kind. They moved around the sphere, seeing themselves reflected in the polished metal. Norman noticed an odd, shifting iridescence, faint rainbow hues of blue and red gleaming in the metal. "It looks like an oversized ball bearing," Harry said. "Keep walking, smart guy." On the far side, they discovered a series of deep, convoluted grooves cut in an intricate pattern into the surface of the sphere. The pattern was arresting, though Norman could not immediately say why. The pattern wasn't geometric, and it wasn't amorphous or organic either. It was hard to say what it was. Norman had never seen anything like it, and as he continued to look at it, he felt increasingly certain this was a pattern never found on Earth, never created by any man, never conceived by a human imagination. Ted and Barnes were right. He felt sure of it. This sphere was something alien. "Ha," Harry said, after staring in silence for a long time. "I'm sure you'll want to get back to us on this," Ted said to Harry. "About where it came from and so on?" "Actually, I know where it came from." And Harry told Ted about the star record and the black hole they had seen on the console screen. "Actually," Ted said, "I suspected that this ship was made to travel through a black hole for some time." "Did you? What was your first clue?" "The heavy radiation shielding." Harry nodded. "That's true. You probably guessed the significance of that before I did." He smiled. "But you didn't tell anybody." "Hey," Ted said, "there's no question about it. I was the one who proposed the black hole first." "Since you're so far ahead of everybody else," Harry said, "how about telling us your proposals for the nature of this object?" "With pleasure," Ted said. "This object is a burnished sphere approximately 10 meters in diameter, not solid, and composed of a dense metal alloy of an as-yet unknown nature. The Kabbalistic markings on this side, these grooves are what you're calling Kabbalistic. Do you mind if I finish? The Kabbalistic markings on this side clearly suggest artistic or religious ornamentation, evoking a ceremonial quality. This indicates the object has significance to whoever made it. I think we can be sure that's true. Personally, I believe that this sphere is intended as a form of contact with us, visitors from another star, another solar system. It is, if you will, a greeting, a message, or a trophy, a proof that a higher form of life exists in the universe.
All well and good and beside the point, Harry said. What does it do? I'm not sure it does anything. I think it just is. It is what it is. Very zen. Oh, what's your idea? Let's review what we know, Harry said, as opposed to what we imagine in a flight of fancy. This is a spacecraft from the future built with all sorts of materials and technology we haven't developed yet, although we are about to develop them. A ship was sent by our descendants through a black hole and into another universe, or another part of our universe. Yes. This spacecraft is unmanned but equipped with robot arms which are clearly designed to pick up things that it finds. So we can think of this ship as a huge version of the unmanned Mariner spacecraft that we sent in the 1970s to Mars to look for life there. This spacecraft from the future is much bigger and more complicated, but it's essentially the same sort of machine. It's a probe, yes? So the probe goes in another universe where it comes upon this sphere. Presumably it finds a sphere floating in space. Perhaps the sphere is sent out to meet the spacecraft. Right, Ted said. Sent out to meet it. As an emissary. That's what I think. In any case, our robot spacecraft, according to whatever built-in criteria it has, decides that this sphere is interesting. It automatically grabs the sphere in its big claw hand here, draws it inside the ship, and brings it home. Except in going home, it goes too far. It goes into the past. It's past, Harry said. Our present. Right. Barnes snorted impatiently. Fine. So this spacecraft goes out and picks up a silver alien sphere and brings it back. Get to the point. What is this sphere? Harry walked forward to the sphere, pressed his ear against the metal, and rapped it with his knuckles. He touched the grooves, his hands disappearing in the deep indentations. The sphere was so highly polished, Norman could see Harry's face distorted in the curve of the metal. Yes, as I suspected. These Kabbalistic markings, as you call them, are not decorative at all. They have another purpose entirely, to conceal a small break in the surface of the sphere. Thus, they represent a door. Harry stepped back. What is the sphere? I'll tell you what I think, Harry said. I think this sphere is a hollow container. I think there's something inside, and I think it scares the hell out of me. Back at the habitat, Norman considered going to sleep, but the prospect of his damp bunk was unappealing. Instead, he went down to the galley, hoping to find one of Rose Levy's desserts. Levy was not there, but there was some coconut cake under a plastic dome. He found a plate, cut a slice, and took it over to one of the portholes. But it was black outside the porthole. The grid lights were turned off, the divers gone. He saw lights in the portholes of D87, the divers' habitat, located a few dozen yards away. The divers must be getting ready to go back to the surface, or perhaps they had already gone. Lots of videotapes, Beth said. Norman turned around. Yes, Tina said. We're recording everything that goes on in this habitat as well as the other ship. It'll be a lot of material. There was a monitor mounted just above his head. It showed Beth and Tina upstairs at the communications console. They were eating cake. Aha, he thought. So that was where the cake had gone. Every 12 hours, the tapes are transferred to the submarine, Tina said. What for? Beth said. That's so, if anything happens down here, the submarine will automatically go to the surface. Oh, great. I won't think about that too much. Where's Dr. Fielding now? He gave up on the sphere and went into the main flight deck with Edmonds. Norman watched the monitor. Tina had stepped out of view. Beth sat with her back to the monitor, eating the cake. On the monitor behind Beth, he could clearly see the gleaming sphere. Monitors showing monitors, he thought. The Navy people who eventually review this stuff are going to go crazy. Tina said, Do you think they'll ever get the sphere open? Beth chewed her cake. Maybe. I don't know. And to Norman's horror, he saw on the monitor behind Beth that the door of the sphere was sliding silently open, revealing blackness inside.
It was closed again by the time Norman ran shouting into D-Sill, but by replaying the video, the others were able to see for themselves that he was telling the truth. Even though they played the tape again and again, they were able to ascertain only that the sphere seemed to be filled with tiny flickering lights. But the sphere was to open again, and very soon. They were just about ready to leave the habitat for the ride back to the surface when Harry managed to slip away from the rest of the group. Then they saw him on the video screen. He was back on the spacecraft, standing in front of the sphere.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. I think you will find this of interest.
Harry turned to face the sphere. He stood with his arms at his sides, relaxed. He did not move or speak. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. The door to the sphere opened.
Not bad, huh?
Harry said with a sudden grin. Then Harry stepped inside the sphere. The door closed behind him. They all began talking at once. Barnes was shouting over everyone else, shouting for quiet, but no one paid any attention until the lights in the habitat went out. They were plunged into darkness. Instantly, Harry was forgotten. Ted said, "What's happened?" The only light came through the portholes, faintly, from the grid lights. A moment later, the grid went out, too. No power.
"I tried to tell you,"
Captain Barnes said. There was a whirring sound, and the lights flickered, then came back on. "We have internal power. We're running on our diesels now."
"Why?"
"Look," Ted said, pointing out the porthole. Outside, they saw what looked like a wriggling silver snake. Then Norman realized it was the cable that linked them to the surface, sliding back and forth across the porthole as it coiled in great loops on the bottom. "They've cut us free."
"That's right," Barnes said. "They've got full gale force conditions outside. They can no longer maintain cables for power and communications. They can no longer use the submarines. They've taken all the divers up, but the subs can't come back for us. At least not for a few days, until the seas calm down."
"They were stuck down here?"
"That's correct."
"For how long?"
"Several days," Barnes said.
"For how long?"
"Maybe as long as a week."
Ted tossed his bag onto the couch.
"What a fantastic piece of luck."
Beth spun. "Are you out of your mind?"
"Let's all stay calm," Barnes said. "Everything's under control. This is just a temporary delay. There's no reason to get upset."
But Norman didn't feel upset. He felt suddenly exhausted. Beth was sulking, angry, feeling deceived. Ted was excited, already planning another excursion to the spacecraft, arranging equipment with Edmonds, the archivist. But Norman felt only tired. His eyes were heavy. He thought he might go to sleep standing there in front of the monitors. He excused himself hurriedly, went back to his bunk, lay down. He didn't care that the sheets were clammy. He didn't care that the pillow was cold. He didn't care that diesels were droning and vibrating in the next cylinder. He thought, this is a very strong avoidance reaction. And then he was asleep.
After Norman awoke, the hours crept by. Ted expounded on his theories about black holes, while the sphere remained closed. Finally, Harry emerged, complaining of a headache and extreme thirst. When Norman examined him, Harry claimed to remember nothing of his experience in the sphere, except that it had been, as he put it, beautiful.
"He's sleeping," Norman told him. "He's in shock. He's confused, but he seems basically intact." "What did he tell you?" Ted said, "about what happened in there?" "He's quite confused," Norman said, "but he's recovering. When we first found him, he didn't even remember his name. Now he does. He remembers my name. He remembers where he is. He remembers he went into the sphere. I think he remembers what happened inside the sphere, too. He just isn't telling."
"Great,"
Ted said. "He mentioned the sea and the foam, but I wasn't clear what he meant by that." "Look outside," Tina said, pointing to the portholes. Norman had an immediate impression of lights. Thousands of lights filling the blackness of the ocean, and his first response was unreasoning terror. The lights in the sphere were coming out to get them. But then he saw each of the lights had a shape and was moving, wriggling. They pressed their faces to the portholes, looked. "Squid," Beth said finally. "Bioluminescent squid. Thousands of them. More," she said. "I'd guess at least 500,000, all around the habitat. Beautiful. The size of the school is amazing," Ted said. "Impressive, but not really unusual," Beth said. "The fecundity of the sea is very great compared with the land." She broke off, turned to Barnes. "Quick, where do you keep specimen nets?"
"I don't want you going out there."
"I have to," Beth said. "Those squid have 6 tentacles.
"So?"
"There's no known species of 6-tentacled squid. This is an undescribable species. I must collect samples." Barnes told her where the equipment locker was, and she went off. Norman looked at the school of squid with renewed interest. The animals were each about a foot long and seemed to be transparent. The large eyes of the squid were clearly visible in the bodies, which glowed a pale blue. "What do you say to squid for dinner?" Levy said.
"Hell no," Barnes said. "If this is an undiscovered species, we're not going to eat it. The last thing I need is everybody sick from food poisoning."
"Very sensible," Ted said.
"I never liked squid anyway."
Interesting mechanism of propulsion, but rubbery texture. At that moment there was a buzz as one of the monitors turned itself on. As they watched, the screen rapidly filled with a solid block of numbers. "Where's that coming from?" Ted said. "The surface?" Barnes shook his head. "We've cut direct contact with the surface." "Then is it being transmitted underwater in some way?" "No," Tina said. "It's too fast for underwater transmission." "Is there another console in the habitat?" "No." "How about D87? D87's empty now. The divers have gone." "Then where'd it come from?" Barnes said. "It looks random to me." Tina nodded. "It may be a discharge from a temporary buffer memory somewhere in the system when we switched over to internal diesel power." "That's probably it," Barnes said. "Buffer discharge on switchover." "I think you should keep it," Ted said, staring at the screen, "just in case it's a message." "A message from where?" "From the sphere." "Hell," Barnes said. "Can't be a message." "How do you know?" "Because there's no way a message can be transmitted. We're not hooked up to anything, certainly not to the sphere. It's got to be a memory dump from somewhere inside our own computer system." Norman had been looking at the screen. He was no mathematician, but he'd looked at a lot of statistics in his life, searching for patterns in the data. That was something human brains were inherently good at, finding patterns in visual material. Norman couldn't put his finger on it, but he sensed a pattern here. He said, "I have the feeling it's not random." "Now let's keep it," Barnes said. Tina went forward to the console. As her hands touched the keys, the screen went blank. "So much for that," Barnes said. "It's gone. Too bad we didn't have Harry to look at it with us." "Yeah," Ted said gloomily. "Too bad." Harry was eating bacon and eggs in the galley. The others stood around and watched him, relieved that he was all right. As they told him the news, he listened with interest. Then Tina shouted from D cylinder, "I'm getting them again. I'm getting the numbers again." The block of numbers appeared on the screen again, but this time there was a space between different groupings. "What do you think, Harry?" Barnes said, pointing to the screen. "Is this what you got before?" "Looks like it, except the spacing is different. Because this is definitely non-random," Harry said. "It's a single sequence repeated over and over. Look, starts here, goes to here, then repeats." He indicated a series of perhaps 50 numbers. "He's right," Tina said. "Fantastic," Barnes said. "Absolutely incredible for you to see it like that." Ted drummed his fingers on the console impatiently. "Elementary, my dear Barnes," Harry said. "That part is easy. The hard part is, what does it mean?" "Surely it's a message," Ted said. "Possibly it's a message," Harry said. "It could also be some kind of discharge from within the computer, the result of a programming error or a hardware glitch. We might spend hours translating it, only to find it says, copyright Acme Computer Systems, Silicon Valley, or something similar." "Well," Ted said, "the greatest likelihood is that this series of numbers originates from within the computer itself," Harry said. "Well, let me give it a try." Tina printed out the screen for him. "I'd like to try it too," Ted said quickly. "Certainly, Dr. Fielding," Tina said, and printed out a second sheet.
Those numbers materializing from nowhere made Norman uneasy. His anxiety only deepened when they discovered that the waters around the habitat were thick with shrimp. Where only 4 days ago there had been no sign of life, now there was an abundance.
"I don't know how you can eat those things," Harry said, pointing to the squid. "They're delicious," Norman said. "Sautéed squid." As soon as he had sat at the table, he became aware how hungry he was, and eating made him feel better. There was a reassuring normalcy about sitting at a table with a knife and fork in his hands. It was almost possible to forget where he was. "Well, I don't know about the squid, but the shrimps are great," Ted said. "Aren't they, Harry?" Ted and Harry were eating shrimp. "Great shrimp," Harry said. "Delicious." "You know how I feel," Ted said. "I feel like Captain Nemo. Remember living underwater off the bounty of the sea?" 20,000 leagues under the sea, Barnes said. "James Mason," Ted said. "Remember how he played the organ? Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Bach toccata and fugue in D minor. "That movie," Harry said, "scared the hell out of me. I saw it when I was a kid and it scared the hell out of me." "I didn't think it was scary," Ted said. "You were older," Harry said. "Not that much older." "Yes, you were. For a kid, it was terrifying. That's probably why I don't like squid now." "You don't like squid," Ted said, "because they're rubbery and disgusting." Barnes said, "That was the movie that made me want to join the Navy." Edmonds went to the porthole and said, "Oh, more visitors." "What now?" Harry said, looking up quickly. Frightened? Norman thought. No, just quick, manic, interested. "Beautiful," Edmonds was saying. "Some kind of little jellyfish all around the habitat. We should really film them." "Have you ever eaten jellyfish?" Ted said. "I hear they're a delicacy." "Some of them are poisonous," Beth said. "Toxins in the tentacles." "Don't the Chinese eat jellyfish?" Harry said. "Yes," Tina said. "They make a soup, too. My grandmother used to make it in Honolulu." The intercom crackled. "Oh, you should see this," Edmund said. "It's beautiful." "Where is she?" "She must be outside," Barnes said. He went to the porthole. "It's like pink snow." They all got up and went to the portholes. Edmonds was outside with the video camera. They could hardly see her through the dense clouds of jellyfish. The jellyfish were small, the size of a thimble, and a delicate, glowing pink. It was indeed like a snowfall. Some of the jellyfish came quite close to the porthole. They could see them well. "They're sticky. They're sticking to my suit." "That pink color is fantastic," Ted said. "Like snow in a sunset." "Very poetic." "They're sticking to my faceplate. I have to pull them off. They leave a smeary streak." She broke off abruptly, but they could still hear her breathing. "Can you see her?" Ted said. "Not very well. She's there, to the left." "They seem to be warm. I feel heat on my arms and legs." "That's not right," Barnes said. He turned to Tina. "Tell her to get out of there." Tina ran from the cylinder toward the communications console. Jane, get out of there." "On the double," Barnes shouted. "Tell her on the double." Edmund's breathing was coming in ragged gasps. "Smears. Can't see very well. Feel. Hurts. My arms. Burning. Hurts. They're eating. Oh. Jane, come back. Jane, are you reading? Jane?" "She's fallen down," Harry said. "Look, you can see her lying. We have to save her," Ted said, jumping to his feet. "Nobody move," Barnes said. Edmonds began to scream. The scream was high-pitched and continuous except for ragged gasps for breath. They could no longer see her through the swarms of jellyfish. They looked at each other, at Barnes. Barnes' face was rigidly set, his jaw tight, listening to the screams. And then, abruptly, there was silence. An hour later, the jellyfish disappeared as mysteriously as they had come. They could see Edmund's body outside the habitat, lying on the bottom, rocking back and forth gently in the current. Nobody spoke. Norman noticed that even Harry had dropped his manic effect. He sat unmoving, staring out the window. Then they trudged back toward the habitat. A bell rang from somewhere inside. Tina went into D-Sill. Moments later, she shouted, "Dr. Adams, more numbers." Harry got up and went into the next cylinder. The others trailed after him. Nobody wanted to look out the porthole any longer.
The pattern of numbers changed again and again, from block to spiral design, from binary to cardinal numbers. It was as if some intelligence was trying very hard to communicate with them. Hours passed. The alarm scared Norman out of a deep sleep, and even though Barnes assured them all it had gone off by accident, everyone was too excited and nervous to sleep again. Then Harry cracked the code. He discovered that the numbers corresponded to the letters that would appear below them on an ordinary typewriter keyboard. By arranging the numbers in a circle and ringing each line of keyboard letters in concentric circles around the numbers, he could read the message.
"They just keep spiraling outward," Harry said. "M is 16, K is 17, and so forth. But finally I understood the message." "What is the message, Harry?" Harry hesitated. "I have to tell you, it's strange." "How do you mean, strange?" Harry tore another sheet off his yellow pad and handed it to them. Norman read the short message, printed in neat block letters. "Hello. How are you? I am fine. What is your name? My name is Jerry. Well, Ted said finally, this is not what I expected at all. It looks childish, Beth said, like something out of those old C-Spot run readers for kids. That's exactly what it looks like. Maybe you translated it wrong, Barnes said. Certainly not, Harry said. Oh, this alien sounds like an idiot, Barnes said. I doubt very much that he is, Ted said. You would doubt it, Barnes said. A stupid alien would blow your whole theory. But it's something to consider, isn't it? A stupid alien. They must have them. I doubt, Ted said, that anyone in command of such high technology as that sphere is stupid. The content certainly appears childish, Harry said. When you think about it, it's highly logical. A simple message is unambiguous, friendly, and not frightening. It makes a lot of sense to send such a message. I think he's approaching us in the simple way that we might approach a dog. You know, hold out your hand, let it sniff, get used to you. Maybe he has a last name, Barnes said hopefully. I mean, my report to Syncompact is going to say one person died on a deep-sat expedition to meet an alien named Jerry. It could sound better. Anything but Jerry, Barnes said. Can we ask him? Ask him what? Harry said. His full name. Harry said, the first thing we have to do is to see if he'll talk at all. Let's give him the first number grouping. He typed a string of numbers. There was a pause and the answer came back. The identical string. Okay, Harry said. Jerry's listening. He made some notes on his pad and typed another string of numbers. What did you say? Beth said. We are friends, Harry said. Forget friends. Ask his damn name, Barnes said. Just a minute. One thing at a time. The response came back. He said, yes. Yes what? Barnes said. Just yes. Let's see if we can get him to switch over to English characters. It'll be easier if he uses letters and not his number codes. Harry typed some numbers in the corresponding word. Jerry mimicked him exactly. After this had gone on for several minutes, Harry smiled. I think he's playing with us. He typed, hello. There was a pause. The screen printed out, I am delighted to make your acquaintance. The pleasure is entirely mine, I assure you. There was a long pause. Nobody spoke. Okay, Barnes said finally. Let's get down to business. He's polite, Ted said. Very friendly. Unless it's an act. Why should it be an act? Don't be naive, Barnes said. Norman looked at the lines on the screen. He had a different reaction from the others. He was surprised to find an expression of emotion. Did this alien have emotions? Probably not, he suspected. The flowery, rather archaic words suggested an adopted tone. Jerry was talking like a character from a historical romance. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Harry said, for the first time in human history, you are online with an alien. What do you want to ask him? His name, Barnes said promptly. Besides his name, Hal. There are certainly more profound questions than his name, Ted said. Are you the entity made in the USA? The guy doesn't wait for an answer. Who says he's a guy? Beth said. Oh, Beth. Maybe Jerry is short for Geraldine. Not now, Beth. Are you the entity made in the USA? Answer him, Barnes said. Yes, we are. Who are you? A long pause, then... We are. We are what? Barnes said, staring at the screen. Hal, take it easy. Harry typed, we are the entities from the USA. Who are you? I am one. Good, Barnes said. So there's only one. Ask him where he's from. Where are you from? I am from a location. Where is the location from where you began? Ted said, that isn't even good English. From where you began. It's going to look foolish when we publish this exchange. I began at awareness. Awareness? Is that a planet or what? Where is awareness? Awareness is. He's making us look like fools, Barnes said. Ted said, let me try. Harry stepped aside and Ted typed. Did you make a journey? Yes. Did you make a journey? Yes, Ted typed. I make a journey. You make a journey. We make a journey together. I am happy. Norman thought. He said he is happy. Another expression of emotion, and this time it didn't seem to come from a book. The statement appeared direct and genuine. Did that mean that the alien had emotions? Or was he just pretending to have them to be playful or to make them comfortable? Let's cut the crap, Barnes said. Ask him about his weapons. I doubt he'll understand the concept of weapons. Everybody understands the concept of weapons, Barnes said. Defense is a fact of life. I must protest that attitude, Ted said. Military people always assume that everyone else is exactly like them. This alien may not have the least conception of weapons or defense. He may come from a world where defense is wholly irrelevant. Since you're not listening, Barnes said, I'll say it again. Defense is a fact of life. If this Jerry is alive, he'll have a concept of defense. The screen printed out. Is your journey now far from your location? Tell him to wait a minute. Ted typed. Please wait. We are talking. Yes, I am also. I am delighted to talk to multiple entities from made in the USA. I am enjoying this much. Barnes said, let's get offline. The screen printed. Please do not stop. I am enjoying this much. Ted typed. We stop now to talk among our entities. It is not necessary to stop. I do not care to stop. Norman thought he detected a petulant, irritable tone, perhaps even a little imperious. I do not care to stop. This alien sounded like Louis XIV. It is necessary for us, Ted typed. I do not wish it. It is necessary for us, Jerry. I understand. The screen went blank. That's better, Barnes said. Now let's regroup here and formulate a game plan. What do we want to ask this guy? I think we better acknowledge, Norman said, that he's showing an emotional reaction to our interaction. Meaning what? Beth said, interested. I think we need to take the emotional content into account in dealing with him. You want to psychoanalyze him? Ted said. Put him on the couch, find out why he had an unhappy childhood? Norman suppressed his anger with some difficulty. Beneath that boyish exterior lies a boy, he thought. No, Ted, but if Jerry does have emotions, then we'd better consider the psychological aspects of his response. I don't mean to offend you, Ted said. But personally, I don't see that psychology has much to offer. Psychology's not a science, it's a form of superstition or a religion. Can we have this argument later? Barnes said. The question is, what do we want to ask this guy? What do we want to ask this guy? They stared at the screen. Uh-oh, Barnes said. Uh-oh. Does that mean what I think it means? Does that mean what I think it means? Ted pushed back from the console. He said loudly, Jerry, can you understand what I am saying? Yes, Ted. Great, Barnes said, shaking his head. Just great. I am happy also.
But by trying to communicate with words, Norman was able to determine quickly that Jerry couldn't read their minds. He used some gentle psychology to persuade Jerry to give them some time alone, and couldn't resist the temptation to gloat a little at Ted when he succeeded. As the group was breaking up, Beth noticed something dangling outside the porthole. It was a human hand. Levy, the cook, was dead, her body broken, her flesh masticated. She had been on her way to take a supply of videotapes to the sub, which was programmed to surface automatically with a record of everything that had happened if someone did not press a special delay button every 12 hours. Tina said that, according to her electronic devices, whatever had attacked Levy was as big as the habitat.
They heard a metallic clank, then another clank. What's that? The grid. Something's hitting the grid. Hitting it? Sounds like it's dismantling it. Norman remembered the grid. It was made of 3-inch pipe. A big fish? A shark? Beth said. Barnes shook his head. It's not moving like a shark, and it's too big. The pong of the sonar echoed in the room. Tina said, "Target acquired, 100 yards. Image it." Image up. They turned to the screens. Norman saw an amorphous, streaky blob. It didn't mean much to him. "Jesus," Barnes said. "Look at the size of him." 80 yards. Another image appeared. Now the blob was a different shape, the streaks in another direction. The image was sharper at the edges, but it still meant nothing to Norman. A big blob with streaks. Once again they heard the hiss of the hydrophones, then a distinct clicking sound. Norman's eyes burned. Sweat had rolled into his eyes. He wiped his forehead with his jumpsuit sleeve. The others were sweating too. The tension was unbearable. He glanced at the video monitor again. The sphere was still closed. They listened. More scraping. A moment of silence, followed by the gurgle of water, very loud, very close. "Jesus," Barnes whispered. "He's right outside." A dull thump against the side of the habitat. The screen flashed on.
I am here.
The first impact came suddenly, knocking them off their feet. They tumbled, rolling on the floor. All around them, the habitat creaked and groaned, the sounds frighteningly loud. Norman scrambled to his feet. He saw Fletcher bleeding from her forehead, and the second impact hit. Norman was thrown sideways against the bulkhead. There was a metallic clang as his head struck metal, a sharp pain, and then Barnes landed on top of him, grunting and cursing. Barnes pushed his hand in Norman's face as he struggled to his feet. Norman slid back to the floor, and a video monitor crashed alongside him, spitting sparks. Beth grabbed him, pulled her head close. "We're leaking," she shouted. "God, we're leaking!"
Do not be afraid.
"Jerry!" Ted was shouting. "Stop this, Jerry! Jerry!" Suddenly, Harry's face was next to Ted, glasses askew. "Save your breath. He's going to kill us all." "Now hear this," Barnes said over the intercom. "Chan and I are going outside. Fletcher assumes command." "Don't go out," Harry shouted. "Don't go out there." "Opening hatch now," Barnes said laconically. "Tina, you follow me." "You'll all be killed," Harry shouted. And then he was thrown against Beth. Norman was on the floor again. He banged his head on one of the couch legs. "We're outside," Barnes said. And abruptly, the banging stopped. The habitat was motionless. They did not move. With the water streaming in through a dozen fine, misty leaks, they looked up at the intercom speaker and listened. "Northeast corner. All right. Feel strong currents. Active. Moving water. Something nearby. Can't see. Visibility less than 5 feet. I barely see stanchion I am holding. I can feel him, though. He's big. He's near. Tina?" Silence. A loud,
Sharp, crackling sound, static, then silence.
Tina! Tina!
Silence.
I've lost Tina.
Another very long silence.
I don't know what. Tina, if you can hear me, stay where you are. I'll take it from here. Okay. He is very close. I feel him moving. Pushes a lot of water, this guy. A real monster.
Silence again. And then a muffled thud that might have been an explosion. They all looked at each other, trying to know what the sound meant. But in the next instant, the habitat began rocking and wrenching again. And Norman, unprepared, was slammed sideways against the sharp edge of the bulkhead door, and the world went gray. He saw Harry strike the wall next to him, and Harry's glasses fell onto Norman's chest. And Norman reached for the glasses for Harry, because Harry needed his glasses. And then Norman lost consciousness, and everything was black. Standing in the shower, Norman looked down at his body, bruised when the amorphous creature slammed into the habitat. I looked like a survivor of an airplane crash, he thought. Everything was painful. He groaned, turning his face up to the water. "Hey," Harry called. "How about it in there?" "Okay." Norman stepped out, and Harry climbed in. Scrapes and bruises covered his thin body. Norman looked over at Ted, who lay on his back in one of the bunks. Ted had dislocated both shoulders, and it had taken Beth half an hour to get them back in, even after she'd shot him up with morphine. As he approached Beth's lab, he heard Tina's recorded voice say,
Do you think they'll ever get the sphere open?
Beth said,
Maybe, I don't know. It scares me.
and then Tina's voice came again.
Do you think they'll ever get the sphere open? Maybe. I don't know.
"Why are you so interested in this tape?" Norman asked. "Because I have nothing better to do. If I don't keep busy, I'm going to start screaming and make one of those traditional feminine scenes." "I think you're fine, Beth. What about Tina? You've seen her injury?" "Yes," Beth frowned. "And I've seen these." She gestured to some of the white eggs in the glass container on the lab bench. "More eggs?" They were clinging to Tina's suit when she came back in. Her injury is consistent with these eggs. Also the smell. You remember the smell when we pulled her back in? Norman remembered very well. Tina smelled strongly of ammonia. It was almost as if she'd been doused in smelling salts. Beth said, "As far as I know, there's only one animal that smells of ammonia that way. One of the species of giant squid." Norman went downstairs to the communications center to see if he could talk to Jerry, but Jerry was not responding. Norman must have dozed off in the console chair, because he looked up abruptly, startled to see a trim black seaman in uniform standing just behind him, looking over his shoulder at the screens. "How's it going, sir?" the seaman asked. He was very calm. His uniform was crisply pressed. Norman felt a burst of tremendous elation. This man's arrival at the habitat could mean only one thing. The surface ships must be back. The ships had returned, and the subs had been sent down to retrieve them. They were all going to be saved. "Sailor," Norman said, pumping his hand, "I'm very damn glad to see you." "Thank you, sir." "When did you get here?" Norman asked. "Just now, sir." "Do the others know yet?" "The others, sir?" "Yes, there's 6 of us left. Have they been told you're here?" "I don't know the answer to that, sir." There was a flatness to this man that Norman found odd. The sailor was looking around the habitat, and for a moment Norman saw the environment through his eyes. The damp interior, the wrecked consoles, the foam-spattered walls. It looked like they had fought a war in here. "Where have you come from?" Norman said. "Come from, sir?" "What ship?" "The Sea Hornet, sir." "It's topside now?" "Yes, sir, it is." "Well, let's get moving," Norman said. "Tell the others you're here." "Yes, sir." The seaman went away. Norman stood and shouted, "Yahoo! We're saved!" "At least he wasn't an illusion," Norman said, staring at the screen.
There he is, big as life, on the monitor. Yes, there he is, but where'd he go, Beth said. For the last hour, they had searched the habitat thoroughly. There was no sign of the black crewman. I saw him, too, Harry said. You did? Norman said. Yeah. I had just woken up, and I had had this dream about being rescued. And I was lying in bed when I heard footsteps, and he walked into the room. Did you talk to him? Yes, but he was funny. He was dull, kind of boring. Norman nodded. You could tell something wasn't right about him. Yes, you could. But where did he come from, Beth said. I can only think of one possibility, Ted said. He came from the sphere. Or at least he was made by the sphere, by Jerry. Why would Jerry do that? To spy on us? Ted shook his head. I've been thinking about this. It seems to me that Jerry has the ability to create things. Animals. I don't think that Jerry is a giant squid, but Jerry created the giant squid that attacked us. I don't think Jerry wants to attack us. But if Beth is right, and we were attacked by a squid, then Jerry might have made the squid, and the squid attacked the habitat, thinking the cylinders were its mortal enemy, the whale. So, the attack happened as a kind of accident of creation. They frowned, listening. To Norman, the explanation was entirely too convenient. I think there is another possibility, that Jerry is hostile. I don't believe that, Ted said. I don't believe Jerry is hostile. He certainly acts hostile, Ted. But I don't think he intends to be hostile. Whatever he intends, Fletcher said, we better not go through another attack, because the structure can't take it, and neither can the support systems. Another attack? There was a long silence as they considered that. Then the gas plasma screens on Tina's console jumped, and a soft pinging filled the room. We have a contact on peripheral thermals, Tina said in a flat voice. Where? Fletcher said. North. Approaching, and on the monitor they saw the words, I am coming. They turned off both the interior and exterior lights. Now there was just the red glow of the space heaters above them. He began to see shapes, the outline of the grid on the bottom and dimly the high fin of the spaceship rising sharply up. Then something else, a green glow in the distance, at the horizon. It's like a green sunrise, Beth said. The glow increased in intensity, and then they saw an amorphous green shape with lateral streaks. Norman thought, it's just like the image we saw before. It looks just like that. He couldn't really make out the details. Is it a squid, he said? Yes, Beth said. I can't see. You're looking at it end on. The body is toward us. The tentacles behind, partially blocked by the body. That's why you can't see it. The squid grew larger. It was definitely coming toward them. Ted ran from the portals back to the consoles. Jerry, are you listening? Jerry? Electronics are off, Dr. Fielding, Fletcher said. Well, let's try and talk to him for God's sake. I think we're past the talking stage now, sir. The squid was faintly luminous, the entire body a deep green. As it came closer, Norman could count the arms, and he saw the two long tentacles, glowing lines extending far beyond the body. The arms and tentacles seemed to move loosely in the water, while the body made rhythmic muscular contractions. 20 yards. God, it's big, Harry said. There was a thump as the tentacles swung against the habitat. Jerry, Ted shouted. His voice was high, strained with tension. The squid paused, the body moved laterally, and they could see the huge eye staring at them. Jerry, listen to me. The squid appeared to hesitate. He's listening, Ted shouted, and he grabbed a flashlight off a wall bracket and shined it out the porthole. He blinked the light once. The great body of the squid glowed green, then went momentarily dark, then glowed green again. He's listening, Beth said. Of course he's listening. He's intelligent. Ted blinked his light twice in rapid succession. The squid blinked back twice. How can it do that, Norman said. It's a kind of skin cell called a chromatophore, Beth said. The animal can open and close these cells at will and block the light. As the squid moved, Ted moved, skipping from porthole to porthole, shining his light. The squid still blinked its glowing body in reply, but Norman sensed it had another purpose now. They all followed Ted from D into C cell, Ted flashed his light. The squid answered, but still moved onward. What's he doing? Maybe he's leading us. Why? They went to B sill, where the life support equipment was located, but there were no portholes in B. Ted moved on to A, the airlock. There were no portholes here either. Ted immediately jumped down and opened the hatch in the floor, revealing dark water. Careful, Ted. I'm telling you, he's intelligent, Ted said. The water at his feet glowed a soft green. Here he comes now. They could not see the squid yet, only the glow. Ted blinked his light into the water. The green blinked back. Still talking, Ted said. And as long as he's talking, with stunning swiftness, the tentacles smashed up through the open water and swung in a great arc around the airlock. Norman had a glimpse of a glowing stalk as thick as a man's body, and a great glowing leaf 5 feet long, swinging blindly past him. And as he ducked, he saw it hit Beth and knock her sideways. Tina was screaming in terror. Strong ammonia fumes burned their eyes. The tentacles swung back toward Norman. He held up his hands to protect himself, touched slimy, cold flesh as the giant arms spun him, slammed him against the airlock's metal walls. The animal was incredibly strong. Get out! Everybody out! Away from the metal! Petty Officer Fletcher was shouting. Ted was scrambling up, away from the hatch and the twisting arm, and he had almost reached the door when the leaf swung back and wrapped around him, covering most of his body. Ted grunted, pushed at the leaf with his hands. His eyes were wide with horror. Norman ran forward, but Harry grabbed him. Leave him! You can't do anything now! Ted was being swung back and forth in the air, across the airlock, banging from wall to wall. His head dropped. Blood ran down his forehead onto the glowing tentacle. Still the arms swung him back and forth, the cylinder ringing like a gong with each impact. Get out, Fletcher was shouting. Everybody out! Beth scrambled past them. Harry tugged at Norman just as the second tentacle burst above the surface to hold Ted in a pincher grip. Off the metal! Damn it, off the metal! Fletcher was shouting, and they stepped under the carpet of B-sill, and she threw a switch, and there was a hum from the generators, and the red heater banks dimmed as 2 million volts of electricity surged through the habitat. The response was instantaneous. The floor rocked under their feet as the habitat was struck by an enormous force, and Norman swore he heard a scream, though it might have been rending metal, and the tentacles quickly drew down out of the airlock. They had a last glimpse of Ted's body as it was pulled into the inky water, and Fletcher yanked down the lever. But the alarms had already begun to sound, and the warning boards lit up. Fire! Fletcher shouted. Fire in E-sill! Fletcher gave them gas masks. Norman's kept slipping down his forehead, obscuring his vision. He was unprepared for the explosion, the concussion pounding his ears painfully. He turned and saw that a fire hose had been unleashed in the room, and then he realized that one of the small portholes had blown or burned out, and the water was rushing in with incredible force. He couldn't see Tina. Then he saw she had been knocked down. She got to her feet, shouting something at Norman, and then she slipped and slid back into the hissing stream of water. It picked her up bodily and flung her so hard against the opposite wall that he knew at once she must be dead. And when he looked down, he saw her floating face down in the water, rapidly filling the room. The back of her head was cut open. He saw the pulpy red flesh of her brain. Norman turned and fled. Water was already trickling over the lip of the bulkhead as he slammed the heavy door shut, spun the wheel to lock it. He couldn't see anything in D. The smoke was worse than before. He saw dim patches of red flame, hazy through the smoke. He heard the hiss of the extinguishers. Where was his own extinguisher? He must have left it in E. Like a blind man, he felt along the walls for another extinguisher, coughing in the smoke. His eyes and lungs burned, despite the mask. And then with a great groan of metal, the pounding started, the habitat rocking under jolts from the squid outside. He heard Fletcher on the intercom, but her voice was scratchy and unclear. The pounding continued, and the horrible wrenching of metal. And Norman thought, we're going to die. This time we're going to die. He couldn't find a fire extinguisher, but his hands touched something metal on the wall, and Norman felt it in the smoky darkness, wondering what it was, some kind of protrusion. And then 2 million volts surged through his limbs into his body, and he screamed once and fell backward.
Ted and Tina and Fletcher. All had been killed in the last attack. On Ted's bunk, Norman found that treasured photo of the red Corvette, and the sight overwhelmed him with sorrow. Now he and Harry and Beth were the only ones left. E-sill was flooded, so they had no food. They would either have to wait until the storm died, and they were rescued, or they could eat the dried food aboard the spaceship. While Harry slept, Norman and Beth discussed the possibility of making an emergency escape in the mini-sub, but they decided it would be too dangerous under the present gale conditions. Norman volunteered to make the next trip to the sub to press the delay button, and he lingered there to study the controls, just in case another attack forced them to abandon all precaution and simply run for their lives. Then the squid struck again. Its long, slimy tentacles smashed into the sub and whipped Norman against a wall. Although he was badly frightened, he managed to grab a diver's spear and wound the creature so that it retreated into the water. He grabbed a handful of the weapons and took them back to the habitat.
"How many did you bring?" Harry said, turning the spear gun over in his hands. 5, Norman said. "That was all I could carry. But it worked." He was examining the bulbous explosive tip. "Yeah, it worked. Blew the whole tentacle off." "I saw the squid going away," Harry said. "I figured you must have done something." "Where's Beth?" "I don't know. Her suit's gone. I think she may have gone to the ship." "Gone to the ship?" Norman said, frowning. "All I know is when I woke up she was gone. I figured you were over at the habitat, and then I saw the squid, and I tried to get you on the radio, but I guess the metal blocked out the transmission." "Beth left?" Norman said. He was starting to get angry. Beth was supposed to stay at the communications console, watching the sensors for him while he was outside. Instead, she had gone to the ship. "Her suit's gone," Harry said again. "Son of a bitch," Norman said. He was suddenly furious, really deeply furious. He kicked the console. "Careful there," Harry said. "Damn it." "Take it easy," Harry said. "Come on, take it easy, Norman." "What the hell does she think she's doing?" "Can you hear me?" Beth's voice said on the intercom. "Anybody hear me?" Norman reached for the microphone, but Harry snatched it away. "I'll do this," he said. "Yes, Beth, we can hear you." "I'm in the ship. I found another compartment aft behind the crew bunks. It's quite interesting." Quite interesting, Norman thought. Quite interesting. He grabbed the microphone from Harry. "Beth, what the hell are you doing over there?" "Oh, hi, Norman. You made it back okay, huh?" "Barely." "Are you all right? You sound mad." "You bet I'm mad. Beth, why did you leave while I was out there?" "Harry said he'd take over for me." "He what?" Norman looked at Harry. Harry was shaking his head no. "He says he never said that." "Well, then he's full of it. What do you think? I'd abandon you when you were outside, for Christ's sake? I'd never do that, Norman." "You know what I think?" Harry said. "I think she's cracking up." Over the intercom, Beth said, "You guys get it straightened out?" Norman said, "I think so, Beth, yes." "Good, because I have made a discovery over here in the spaceship." "What's that?" "I found the crew." She showed them into a large room, unlike anything Norman had ever seen. The floor glowed purple, bathing the room in ultraviolet light from beneath. Mounted on all 4 walls were a series of wide glass tubes. Inside each tube was a narrow silver mattress. The tubes all appeared empty. "Over here," Beth said. They peered through one glass tube. The naked woman had once been beautiful. It was still possible to see that. Her skin was dark brown and deeply wrinkled, her body withered. "Mummified?" Harry said. Beth nodded. "Best I can figure out, I haven't opened the tube, considering the risk of infection." "What was this room?" he said, looking around. It must have been some kind of hibernation chamber. Each tube is separately connected to a life support system. Power supply, air handlers, heaters, the works, in the next room. Harry counted. 20 tubes, he said. "And 20 bunks," Norman said. "So where is everybody else?" Beth shook her head. "I don't know." "This woman is the only one left?" "Looks like it. I haven't found any others." "I think she was important to the expedition," Beth said. "Maybe even the captain or the co-captain. The others were mostly men, and they did something foolish, I don't know what. Something she advised them against, and as a result they all died. She alone remained alive in this spacecraft, and she piloted it home, and there was something wrong with her, something she couldn't help, and she died. What was wrong with her? I don't know. Something. Fascinating, Norman thought. He'd never really considered it before, but this room, for that matter, this entire spacecraft, was one big Rorschach, or more accurately, a TAT. The thematic apperception test was a psychological test that consisted of a series of ambiguous pictures. Subjects were supposed to tell what they thought was happening in the pictures. Since no clear story was implied by the pictures, the subjects supplied the stories, and the stories told much more about the storytellers than about the pictures.
Now Beth was telling them her fantasy about this room, that a woman had been in charge of the expedition. The men had failed to listen to her. They had died, and she alone had remained alive, the sole survivor. It didn't tell them much about this spaceship, but it told them a lot about Beth.
I get it, Harry said. You mean she's the one who made the mistake and piloted the ship back too far into the past? Typical woman driver.
Do you have to make a joke of everything?
Do you have to take everything so seriously?
This is serious, Beth said.
I'll tell you a different story, Harry said. This woman screwed up. She was supposed to do something, and she forgot to do it, or else she made a mistake. The rest of the crew died, and she never woke up from the hibernation, never realized what she had done because she was so unaware of what was really happening.
I'm sure you like that story better, Beth said. It fits with your typical male contempt for women.
Easy, Norman said.
You resent the power of the female, Beth said. Norman walked out of the room. Where are you going?
Your audience is leaving.
Why? Because you're both boring.
Oh, Beth said.
Mr. Cool's psychologist decides we are boring.
That's right, Norman said, walking through the glass tunnel, not looking back.
What do you get off making all these judgments of other people? Beth shouted at him. He kept walking. I'm speaking to you. Don't you walk away while I'm speaking to you, Norman. He came into the galley once more and started opening the drawers, looking for the nut bars. He found a bar, tore the foil, ate it. He finished the nut bar and immediately ate another one. How much longer do they have down here? At least 36 hours more. He looked for a place to carry additional nut bars, but his polyester jumpsuit had no pockets. Beth and Harry came into the galley much chagrined. Want a nut bar, he said, chewing. We want to apologize, she said.
For what? For acting like children, Harry said.
I'm embarrassed, Beth said. I feel as if I've let you both down. I shouldn't be here in the first place. I'm not worthy to be in this group.
Norman said, Beth, have a nut bar and stop feeling sorry for yourself. Yes, Harry said. I think I like you better angry.
I'm sick of those nut bars, Beth said. Before you came here, I ate 11 of them.
Well, make it an even dozen, Norman said, and we'll go back to the habitat.
Walking back across the ocean floor, they were tense, watching for the squid. But Norman derived comfort from the fact that they were armed, and something else, some inner confidence that came from his earlier confrontation with the squid. You hold that spear gun like you mean it, Beth said.
Yes, I guess so.
All his life he had been an academic, a university researcher, and had never conceived of himself as a man of action, at least nothing beyond the occasional game of golf. Now, holding the spear gun ready, he found he rather liked the feeling.
When they were alone, Beth tried to win Norman over to her opinion that Harry was acting suspiciously. But again, Norman refused to take sides. Beth got angry and left abruptly as soon as Harry entered the room. Then Jerry contacted them, and Norman, speaking as he would to a naughty child, tried to make him understand that his pranks had gone too far. But Jerry was not contrite.
I am enjoying to manifest for you, Norman, and also for you, Harry.
Jerry, Norman explained, your manifestations injure our entities. Some of our entities are already gone.
Yes, I know.
If you continue your manifestations...
Yes, I am liking to manifest. It is humorous for you.
Then pretty soon all our entities will be gone, and then there will be no one to talk to you.
Bring them back.
We can't do that. They are gone forever.
Why?
Just like a kid, Norman thought. Just exactly like a kid. Tell the kid you can't do what he wants, you can't play the way he wants, and he refuses to accept it. We do not have the power, Jerry, to bring them back.
We are friends, Norman and Harry.
Yes, we are.
Then bring back the entities.
He just refuses to understand, Harry said. Jerry, for God's sake, we can't do it.
You are humorous, Harry. Make it again.
He's definitely reading strong emotional reactions as some kind of manifestation, Norman thought. Was this his idea of play? To make a provocation to the other party and then to be amused by their responses? Was he delighted to see the vivid emotions brought on by the squid? Was this his idea of a game?
Harry, make it again. Harry, make it again.
Hey, man, Harry said angrily. Get off my back. Norman had an idea. Jerry, if you wish the entities back, why don't you bring them back?
I am not pleased to do this.
But you could do it if you wanted to.
I can do anything.
Yes, of course you can. So why don't you bring back the entities you desire?
No, I am not happy to do this.
Why not? Harry said.
Hey, man, get off my back.
Norman lay on his back, stared at the red humming coils of the ceiling heater. He had an idea, got out of bed, and went into D-Seal, the console. Still on the screen were the words. Hey, man, get off my back. Jerry, Norman said. Are you there, Jerry? The screen did not respond. Jerry wasn't there. Norman looked at the stack of printouts to one side. I really should go over this stuff, he thought, because something troubled him about Jerry. Norman couldn't put his finger on it, but even if one imagined the alien as the spoiled child king, Jerry's behavior didn't make sense. It just didn't add up. If Jerry liked to scare them, if he enjoyed rattling their cage and seeing them jump, why use a squid? Norman sighed. His trouble lay in his assumptions. Norman was assuming that the alien had logical processes similar to his own. But that might not be true. For one thing, Jerry might operate at a much faster metabolic rate and thus have a different sense of time. Kids played with the toy only until they got tired of it. Then they changed to another. The hours that seemed so painfully long to Norman might be only a few seconds in the consciousness of Jerry. He might just be playing with the squid for a few seconds until he dropped it for another toy. Kids also had a poor idea about breaking things. If Jerry didn't know about death, then he wouldn't mind killing Ted because he would think the death was just a temporary event, a humorous manifestation by Ted. He might not realize he was actually breaking his toys. Of course, he thought, they'd been talking about a squid during the conversation at dinner. Jerry must have overheard that. He must have decided that a squid would be a provocative item to manifest. And he was certainly right about that. Norman shifted the papers and came upon the very first message that Harry had decoded. Hello. How are you? I am fine. What is your name? My name is Jerry. Norman sat at the console, stared at the keyboard. What had Harry said? The keyboard was a spiral. The letter G was 1 and B was 2 and so on. Very clever to figure it out. Norman would never have figured that out in a million years. He started trying to find the letters in the first sequence. Let's see. 00 marked the beginning of the message, Harry had said. And 03, that was H. And then 21, that was E. Then 25 was L, and 25 was another L. And just above it, 26 was O. Hello. Yes, it all fitted. He continued translating. 032629 was how. How are you? So far, so good. Norman experienced a certain pleasure, almost as if he were decoding it himself for the first time. I am fine. He moved more quickly, writing down the letters. What is your name? Now, 1604 was my. My name is. But then he found a mistake in one letter. Was that possible? Norman kept going, found a second mistake, then wrote out the message and stared at it in growing shock. My name is Harry. He went over it again, but there was no mistake. Not by him. The message was perfectly clear. Hello. How are you? I am fine.
What is your name? My name is Harry. Beth sat up in her bed in the laboratory and stared at the message Norman had given her. "Oh, my God," she said. She pushed her thick, dark hair away from her face. "How can it be?" she said. "It all goes together," Norman said. "Just think, when did the messages start? After Harry came out of the sphere. When did the squid and the other animals first appear? After Harry came out of the sphere. Yes, but at first there were little squid. But then when we were going to eat them, suddenly there were shrimps, too, just in time for dinner. Why? Because Harry doesn't like to eat squid." Beth said nothing. She just listened. "And who as a child was terrified by the giant squid in 20,000 leagues under the sea?" "Harry was," she said. "I remember he said that." Norman went on in a rush. "And when does Jerry appear on the screen? When Harry is present, not at other times. And when does Jerry answer us as we talk? When Harry is in the room to hear what we're saying. And why can't Jerry read our minds? Because Harry can't read our minds. And remember how Barnes kept asking for the name? And Harry wouldn't ask for the name? Why? Because he was afraid the screen would say, Harry, not Jerry. And the crewman, right, the black crewman, who shows up just as Harry is having a dream of being rescued? A black crewman shows up to rescue us?" Beth was frowning, thinking, what about the giant squid? Well, in the middle of its attack, Harry hit his head and was knocked unconscious. Immediately, the squid disappeared. It didn't come back again until Harry woke up from his nap and told you he'd take over. "My God," Beth said. "Yes," Norman said. "It explains a lot." She was silent for a while, staring at the message. "But how is he doing it?" "I doubt if he is, at least not consciously." Norman had been thinking about this. "Let's assume," he said, "that something happened to Harry when he went inside the sphere. He acquired some kind of power while in the sphere." "Like what?" "The power to make things happen just by thinking of them. The power to make his thoughts real." Beth frowned. "Make his thoughts real?" "He just gets the idea and things happen by themselves. He manifests things. Harry imagines a frightening squid and suddenly we have a frightening squid outside our window?" "Exactly. And when he loses consciousness, the squid disappears. And he got this power from the sphere?" "Yes." Beth frowned. "Why is he doing this? Is he trying to kill us?" Norman shook his head. "No, I think he's in over his head." "How do you mean?" "Well," Norman said, "an alien civilization could strew these things around the galaxy, and any intelligence that picks them up would get to experience the power of the sphere, which is that whatever you think comes true. If you think positive thoughts, you get delicious shrimp for dinner. If you think negative thoughts, you get monsters trying to kill you. Same process, just a matter of content." "I still don't see why Harry is doing this." "Do you know anything about Jungian psychology?" Beth said, "That stuff has never struck me as relevant." "Well, it's relevant now," Norman said. "As Jung saw it, if you didn't acknowledge your shadow side, it would rule you. So we're seeing Harry's shadow side?" "In a sense, yes. Harry needs to present himself as Mr. Arrogant Know-It-All Man," Norman said. "He certainly does. So if he's afraid to be down here in his habitat, and who isn't, then he can't admit his fears. But he has the fears anyway, whether he admits them or not. And so his shadow side justifies the fears, creating things that prove his fears to be valid. The squid exists to justify his fears. Something like that, yes. If what you're saying is true, then Harry is a very dangerous man." "Yes." "Hey, you guys," Harry said, coming up the stairs. "Is this a private party, or can anybody join in?" "Sure," Norman said. "Come on up, Harry." "Was I interrupting something?" No. "Well, I can tell when someone is staring at me, for Christ's sake." "Don't get paranoid, Harry." And then they heard a low, insistent beeping from the communications console downstairs. They exchanged glances and went down to look.
This time the screen printed out the message they all wanted most to hear. The Navy was sending a sub down to them in just 16 hours. Norman did not feel as relieved as he should have, however. He was desperately afraid that their rescuers would arrive too late. Jerry appeared on the screen, and once again Norman tried to reason with him. But Jerry was in an angry, threatening mood, and just before the communication ended, the screen printed out,
I will kill you all.
Now Norman and Beth knew they had no choice but to keep Harry from making manifestations of his fears. They managed to hold him down and inject him with a heavy sedative, and then Beth hurried to the sub to leave the latest batch of tapes and press delay for the last time. When she didn't come back promptly, Norman was alarmed. Then he saw her. She was unloading boxes of explosives from the sub and placing them all around the area.
It's very simple, Beth said, when she got back to the habitat. Explosives? Norman pointed to the screen. It says here, TEVX are, weight for weight, the most powerful conventional explosives known. What the hell are you doing putting them around the habitat? Defense. How is it defense? Believe me, it is. Beth, it's dangerous to have that stuff so close to us. It's not wired up, Norman. In fact, it's not wired up around the ship either. I have to go out and do that by hand. She glanced at the screens. I thought I'd wait a while first, maybe take a nap. Are you tired? No, Norman said. You haven't slept in a long time, Norman. I'm not tired. He was hungry, but he knew there wasn't any food. He was tired, but there wasn't any place for him to sleep. Both E and C cylinders were flooded, and he didn't want to go upstairs with Beth. Norman lay down on the floor of D-Sill beside Harry on the couch. It was cold and damp on the floor. For a long time he couldn't sleep. The pounding, that terrifying pounding, and the shaking of the floor awakened him abruptly. He rolled over and got to his feet, instantly alert. He saw Beth standing by the monitors. "What is it?" he cried. "What is it?" "What is what?" Beth said. She seemed calm. She smiled at him. Norman looked around. The alarms hadn't gone off. The lights weren't flashing. I don't know. I don't know. He trailed off. You thought we were under attack again, she said. He nodded. Why would you think that, Norman? She said. Beth was looking at him again in an odd way, an appraising way, her stare very direct and cool. Harry's still unconscious, isn't he? So why would you think we were being attacked? I don't know. I guess I was dreaming. I see. She was working with the screens. By the way, what did you find out about the balloon? The balloon? A surface balloon. Remember, we talked about it. He shook his head. He didn't remember. Before we went out to the sub, I asked about the control codes to send a balloon to the surface, and you said you'd look in the computer and see if you could find how to do it. I did? Yes, Norman, you did. I really don't remember, he said. I'm sorry. Norman, we have to work together in these last few hours. I agree, Beth. Absolutely. An hour later, they figured out how to release the balloon. They distantly heard a metallic sizzle as the wire unwound from the outside spool, trailing behind the inflated balloon as it shot toward the surface. Then there was a long pause. Good news, Beth said when they got the readout. The surface is okay. Norman was staring at the screen, thinking about the fact that sunlight was recorded. He had never longed for sunlight before. It was funny what you took for granted. Now the thought of seeing sunlight struck him as unbelievably pleasurable. He could imagine no greater joy than to see sun and clouds and blue sky. He couldn't talk her out of it. She insisted on going outside and wiring the explosives around the ship. It was an absolutely fixed idea in her mind. When she left, he had said to her, "But you won't wire up the explosives near the habitat." "No, Norman, I won't." "Promise me." "I told you I won't. If it's going to upset you, I won't." Now the red lights were strung along the length of the ship, starting at the dimly visible tail, which rose out of the coral bottom. Beth moved farther north, toward the rest of the unopened crates. Norman looked at Harry, who snored loudly but who remained unconscious. He paced back and forth in D-Sill, and then went to the monitors. The screen blinked.
I am coming.
Oh, God, he thought. And in the next moment he thought, how can this be happening? It can't be happening. Harry was still out cold. How could it be happening?
I am coming for you.
Beth! Her voice sounded tinny on the intercom. Yes, Norman? Get the hell out of there.
Do not be afraid.
What is it, Norman? I'm getting something on the screen. Check Harry. He must be waking up. He's not. Get back here, Beth.
I am coming now.
All right, Norman. I'm heading back. He strained to look toward the horizon where the squid had always appeared. The first thing had always been a green glow on the horizon, but he saw no glow now. Beth was panting.
I can feel something, Norman. I can feel the water surging, strong.
The screen flashed.
I will kill you.
I can feel it, Norman. It's close. Jesus God.
I don't see anything, Beth. He heard a rapid, sharp, clicking sound. At first he thought it was static on the line, and then he realized it was her teeth chattering as she shivered. She was slowing down, despite herself. She'd come into the area of the habitat lights, and she was no more than 10 yards from the hatch, but he could see her limbs moving slowly, clumsily. And now at last he could see something swirling the muddy sediment behind her in the darkness beyond the lights. It was like a tornado, a swirling cloud of muddy sediment. He couldn't see what was inside the cloud, but he sensed the power within it.
Close. Nor.
Beth stumbled, fell. The swirling cloud moved toward her.
Without even taking time to put on his suit, Norman plunged into the icy water, threw his arms around Beth, and pulled her back to the ship.
He had a murderous, pounding headache. It made the habitat seem unpleasantly bright, and he was cold. Beth had wrapped him in blankets and had moved him next to the big space heaters in D-Sill, so close that the hum of the electrical elements was very loud in his ears. But he was still cold. He looked down at her now as she bandaged his cut knee. "How is it?" he said. "Not good," she said. "It's right down to the bone. But you'll be all right. It's only a few more hours now." "Yes, ouch. Sorry. Almost done." Beth was following first aid directions from the computer. "You know, that was a hell of a thing you did," Beth said, "jumping in like that without a suit. That water's only a couple of degrees above freezing. It was very brave. Stupid, but brave." She smiled. "You saved my life, Norman." "I didn't think," Norman said. "I just did it." "Well, you saved my life. Thank you." "Any time," Norman said. He smiled. "Just don't do it again." "Beth," he said, "why do you think all this is happening?" "All what?" "The screen, printing words, and another manifestation coming to attack us." Beth looked at him in a flat, neutral way. "What do you think, Norman?" "It's not Harry." "No, it's not." "And why is it happening?" Norman said. He got up, pulling the blankets tighter around him. He flexed his bandaged knee. It hurt, but not too badly. He moved to the porthole and looked out the window. In the distance he could see the string of red lights from the explosives Beth had set and armed. He had never understood why she had wanted to do that. She had acted so strangely about the whole thing. He looked down toward the base of the habitat. Red lights were glowing there, too, just below the porthole. She had armed the explosives around the habitat. "Beth, what have you done?" "Done?" "You armed the explosives around DH-8. "Yes, Norman," she said. She stood watching him, very still, very calm. "Beth, you promised you wouldn't do that." "I know. I had to." "How are they wired? Where's the button?" "There is no button. They're set on automatic vibration sensors." "You mean they'll go off automatically?" "Yes, Norman." "Beth, this is crazy. Someone is still making these manifestations. Who is doing that, Beth?" She smiled slowly, a lazy cat smile, as if he secretly amused her. "Don't you really know?" He did know. Yes, he thought. He knew, and it chilled him. "You are making these manifestations, Beth." "No, Norman," she said, still calm. "I'm not doing it. You are." "I see you don't believe me," Beth said, still very calm. "Are you able to talk?" "Sure," Norman said. "Be logical, all of that?" "Sure," he said, thinking. "I'm not the crazy one here." "All right," Beth said. "Remember when you told me about Harry, how all the evidence pointed to Harry?" "Yes, of course. You asked me if I could think of another explanation, and I said no. But there is another explanation, Norman. When all the strange things start to happen, the problem isn't hardware anymore. Now it's a psychological problem. It's right up your alley, Norman, your particular area of expertise. Suddenly you become the center of attention, don't you?" "No," he thought. "This can't be right. When Jerry starts to communicate with us, who notices that he has emotions? Who insists we deal with Jerry's emotions? None of us are interested in emotions, Norman. Barnes only wants to know about armaments. Ted only wants to talk science. Harry only wants to play logical games. You're the one who's interested in emotions. And who manipulates Jerry or fails to manipulate him? You, Norman. It's all you. It can't be, Norman said. His mind was reeling. He struggled to find a contradiction and found it. It can't be me because I haven't been inside the sphere. Yes, you have, Beth said. You just don't remember. Norman said, when did I go to the sphere? Before the first squid attack. After Harry came out. I was asleep. I was sleeping in my bunk. No, Norman, you weren't. Because Fletcher came to get you and you were gone. We couldn't find you for about 2 hours, and then you showed up, yawning. I don't believe you, he said. I know you don't. You'd prefer to make it somebody else's problem, and you're clever. You're skilled at psychological manipulation, Norman. But the message, it said, my name is Harry. And what's your name? Norman Johnson. Your full name. He paused. Somehow his mouth wasn't working. His brain was blank. I'll tell you what it is, Beth said. I looked it up. It's Norman Harrison Johnson. No, he thought. No. She can't be right. I want to put you under, Norman. Like Harry. He shook his head. It's only for a few hours, Norman, she said. And then she seemed to decide. She moved swiftly toward him, and he saw the syringe in her hand, the glint off the needle, and he twisted away. The needle plunged into the blanket, and he threw it off and ran for the stairs. Norman, come back here. He was climbing the stairs. He saw Beth running forward with the needle. He kicked with his foot, got upstairs into her lab, and slammed the hatch down on her. Norman! She pounded on the hatch. Norman stood on it, knowing that she could never lift his weight. Beth continued to pound. Norman Johnson, you open that hatch this minute. No, Beth. I'm sorry. He paused. What could she do? Nothing, he thought. He was safe here. She couldn't get to him up here. She couldn't do anything to him as long as he remained here. Then he saw the metal pivot move in the center of the hatch between his feet. On the other side of the hatch, Beth was spinning the wheel, locking him in. The only lights in the laboratory shone on the bench next to a row of neatly bottled specimens. Squid, shrimps, giant squid eggs. He touched the bottles absently. He turned on the laboratory monitor and punched buttons until he saw Beth downstairs on the video. Beth was working at the main D-Sil console. To one side he saw Harry still lying unconscious. Norman, can you hear me? Yes, Beth, I hear you. Norman, you are acting irresponsibly. You are a menace to this entire expedition. Is that true, he wondered? He didn't think he was a menace to the expedition. It didn't feel true to him. But how often in his life had he confronted patients who refused to acknowledge what was happening in their lives? I think you are a good person, Norman. He said nothing. He just watched her on the monitor. I think you have integrity and that you believe in telling the truth. This is a difficult moment for you to face the reality about yourself. I know your mind is struggling now to find excuses, to blame someone else. But I think you can do it, Norman. Harry couldn't do it, but you can. I think you can admit the hard truth, that so long as you remain conscious, the expedition is menaced. He felt the strength of her conviction, heard the quiet force of her voice. As Beth spoke, it felt almost as if her ideas were clothing being draped over his body. He began to see things her way. She was so calm. She must be right. Her ideas had such power. Her thoughts had such power. Beth, have you been in the sphere? No, Norman. That's your mind, trying to evade the point again. I haven't been in the sphere. You have. He looked at the video recorder next to the monitor. Beth had used this recorder to play the same tape again and again, the tape in which the sphere had opened by itself. That tape was now lying on the counter beside the recorder. He pushed the tape into the slot, clicked the recorder on. Why bother to look at it now, he thought. You're just delaying. You're wasting time. Norman, why are you watching that tape? He looked around quickly. Was there a video camera in the room allowing her to see him? Yes, high up in the ceiling, next to the upper hatch. Why are you watching that tape, Norman? It was here. Who said you could watch that tape? Nobody, Norman said. It was just here. Turn the tape off, Norman. Turn it off now. She didn't sound so calm anymore. What's the matter, Beth? Turn that damn tape off, Norman. He was about to ask her why, but then he saw Beth enter the video image, stand next to the sphere. Beth closed her eyes and clenched her fists. Convoluted grooves of the sphere parted, revealing blackness. And as he watched, Beth stepped inside the sphere, and the door of the sphere closed behind her. "You goddamned men," Beth said in a tight, angry voice. "You're all the same. You can't leave well enough alone, none of you." "You lied to me, Beth." He stopped the tape. The monitor now showed Beth at the console in the room below, pushing buttons on the console. "Beth," he said, "you're so big on the unconscious, Norman. The unconscious this, the unconscious that. Probably wants to kill us all, just because you want to kill yourself, and you think everybody else should die with you." He felt a shuddering chill. Beth, with her lack of self-esteem, her deep core of self-hate, had gone inside the sphere. She saw herself as a victim, but she failed to see how she had done it to herself. And she's put explosives all around the habitat, he thought. "I won't let you do it, Norman. I'm going to stop you before you kill us all." He began to see the pattern now. Beth had figured out how to open the sphere, and she had gone there in secret, because she had always been attracted to power. Now, even the power victimized her. It was very different from Harry. Harry had denied his fears, and so fearful images had manifested themselves. But Beth denied her power, for she manifested a churning cloud of formless, uncontrolled power, a power that she could not touch or see, a formless, abstract power that was coming to get her. And to defend herself, she had armed the habitat with explosives. It wasn't much of a defense, Norman thought, unless you secretly wanted to kill yourself. The horror of his predicament became clear to him. "I'm sorry, Norman, but I have to do this to you." He heard a soft hiss. The alarm on his chest badge began to beep. He looked down at it. Even in the darkness, he could see it was now gray. He knew immediately what had happened. Beth had turned off his air.
Norman huddled in the darkness. Do something, he told himself. But all he could think of was breathing. Suddenly there flashed into his head the advice of one of his old psychology professors. If what you're doing doesn't work, Dr. Stein used to say, do something else, no matter how crazy it seems. So Norman did the craziest thing possible. He climbed up the ladder to the ceiling hatch, opened it, and escaped. Somehow, perhaps from sheer will, he managed to propel himself along the side of the habitat and into the airlock at A-Sill. Immediately he clambered into his suit.
He sat heavily on the deck, breathing hard, but already he knew that he was going to be all right. The pain was lessening, his head was clearing, and he was no longer shaking so badly. He had been chilled, but not long enough for it to be central. He was recovering fast. The radio cackled. "You'll never get to me, Norman." He got to his feet, pulled on his weight belt, locked the buckles. "Norman?" He said nothing. He felt quite warm now, quite normal. "Norman, I'm surrounded by explosives. If you come anywhere near me, I will blow you to pieces. You'll die, Norman. You'll never get near me." But Norman wasn't going to Beth. He had another plan entirely. He heard his tank air hiss as the pressure equalized in his suit. He jumped back into the water. The sphere gleamed in the light. Norman saw himself reflected in its perfectly polished surface, then saw his image break up, fragmented on the convolutions, as he moved around to the back, to the door. It looked like a mouth, he thought, like the maw of some primitive creature about to eat him. Confronted by the sphere, seeing once again the alien, unhuman pattern of the convolutions, he felt his intention dissolve. He was suddenly afraid. He didn't think he could go through with it. Don't be silly, he told himself. Harry did it, and Beth did it. They survived. He closed his eyes, focused his attention, and thought, open up. He opened his eyes and looked at the sphere. It was still closed. I am ready for you to open up, he thought. I am ready now. Nothing happened. The sphere did not open. Norman hadn't considered the possibility that he would be unable to open the sphere. After all, 2 others had already done it. How had they managed it? Harry, with his logical brain, had been the first to figure it out. But Harry had only figured it out after he had seen Beth's tape. So Harry had discovered a clue in the tape, an important clue. Beth had also reviewed the tape, watching it again and again until she finally figured it out too. Something in the tape. How did it go? In his mind he saw the images. Beth and Tina talking, Beth eating cake. Then Tina had said something about the tapes being stored in the submarine, and Beth said something back. Then Tina had moved away out of the picture, but she had said, "Do you think they'll ever get the sphere open?" And Beth said, "Maybe. I don't know." And the sphere had opened at that moment. Why? Beth must have imagined the sphere open, must have seen an image of the open sphere in her mind. There was a deep, low rumble, a vibration that filled the room. The sphere was open, the door gaping wide and black. He stepped inside. The sphere closed behind him. There is darkness. And then, as his eyes adjust, something like fireflies. It is a dancing, luminous foam, millions of points of light swirling around him. What is this, he thinks? All he sees is the foam. There is no structure to it, and apparently no limit. It is a surging ocean, a glistening, multifaceted foam. He feels great beauty and peace. It is restful to be here. He moves his hands, scooping the foam, his movements making it swirl. But then he notices that his hands are becoming transparent, that he can see the sparkling foam through his own flesh. He looks down at his body, his legs, his torso. Everything is becoming transparent to the foam. He is part of the foam. The sensation is very pleasant. He grows lighter. Soon he is lifted and floats in the limitless ocean foam. He puts his hands behind his neck and floats. He feels happy. He feels he could stay here forever. He becomes aware of something else in this ocean. Some other presence. "Anybody here?" he says. "I am here." He almost jumps. It is so loud, or it seems loud. Then he wonders if he has heard anything at all. "Did you speak?" "No." "How are we communicating?" "The way everything communicates with everything else." "Which way is that?" "Why do you ask if you already know the answer?" "But I don't know the answer." The foam moves him gently, peacefully, but he receives no answer for a time. He wonders if he is alone again. "Are you there?" "Yes." "I thought you had gone away." "There is nowhere to go." "Do you mean you are imprisoned inside this sphere?" "No." "Will you answer a question? Who are you?" "I am not a who." "Are you God?" "God is a word." "I mean, are you a higher being? Or a higher consciousness?" "Higher than what?" "Higher than me, I suppose." "How high are you?" "Pretty low. At least I imagine so." "Well then, that's your trouble." "Are you from another planet?" "No." "Are you from another civilization?" "No." "Where are you from?"
Why do you ask if you already know the answer?
In another time, he thinks he would be irritated by this repetitive answer. But now he feels no emotions. There are no judgments. He is simply receiving information, a response. He thinks, but this sphere comes from another civilization.
Yes.
And maybe from another time.
Yes.
And aren't you a part of the sphere?
I am now.
So, where are you from?
Why do you ask? if you already know the answer.
The foam gently shifts him, rocking him soothingly. I am troubled.
Tell me.
I am troubled because you sound like Jerry.
That is to be expected.
But Jerry was really Harry.
Yes.
So are you Harry, too?
No, of course not.
Who are you?
I am not a who.
Then why do you sound like Jerry or Harry?
Because we spring from the same source.
I don't understand.
When you look in the mirror, who do you see?
I see myself.
I see.
Are you an alien intelligence?
Are you an alien intelligence?
I find you difficult to talk to. Will you give me the power?
What power?
The power you gave to Harry and Beth. The power to make things happen by imagination. Will you give it to me?
No.
Why not?
Because you already have it.
I don't feel as if I have it.
I know.
And how is it that I have the power?
How did you get in here?
I imagine the door opening.
Yes.
Rocking in the foam. Waiting for a further response, but there is no response. There's only gentle movement in the foam, a peaceful timelessness, and a drowsy sensation. After a passage of time, he thinks, I'm sorry, but I wish you would just explain and stop speaking in riddles.
The ability to imagine is the largest part of what you call intelligence. You think the ability to imagine is merely a useful step on the way to solving a problem or making something happen. But imagining it is what makes it happen. This is the gift of your species, and this is the danger, because you do not choose to control your imaginings. You imagine wonderful things, and you imagine terrible things, and you take no responsibility for the choice. You say you have inside you both the power of good and the power of evil, the angel and the devil. But in truth, you have just one thing inside you, the ability to imagine. I hope you enjoyed this speech, which I plan to give at the next meeting of the American Association of Psychologists and Social Workers, which is meeting in Houston in March. I feel it will be quite well received. What? Who did you think you were talking to? God?
Who is this?
You, of course.
But you are somebody different from me, separate. You are not me.
Yes, I am. You imagined me.
Tell me more.
There is no more.
His cheek rested on cold metal. He rolled onto his back and looked at the polished surface of the sphere, curving above him. The convolutions of the door had changed again. Norman got to his feet. He felt relaxed and at peace, as if he had been sleeping a long time. He felt as if he had had a wonderful dream. He remembered everything quite clearly. He moved through the ship, back to the flight deck, and then down the hallway with the ultraviolet lights to the room with all the tubes on the wall. The tubes were filled. There was a crewman in each one. Just as he thought, Beth had manifested a single crewman, a solitary woman, as a way of warning them. Now Norman was in charge, and he found the room full. Not bad, he thought. He looked at the room and thought, gone, one at a time. One by one, the crew members in the tubes vanished before his eyes until they were all gone. Back, one at a time. The crew members popped back in the tubes, materializing on demand. All men. The women were changed into men. All women. They all became women. He had the power.
The first thing he tried to do with it was to deactivate the explosives, but it didn't work. Beth's will was as strong as his own, and she wanted them on. Hoping that they were wired like Christmas tree lights, and that by disengaging one cable he could shut down the whole system, Norman yanked. Instantly, an alarm went off, and a deep, resonant male voice rang out a warning that construction personnel had 20 minutes to leave the blast area. Of course, thought Norman, these explosives were used at construction sites, and for safety's sake gave ample warning before detonating. Now the explosives really would go off. Suddenly his choices were limited to one: the sub. He got as far as 900 feet from the surface, and then he could continue no farther. He had to go back for Harry and Beth.
Beth was huddled in the back, wedged among pipes, crying like a child. She held one of the explosive-tipped spear guns in her hand. She looked at him tearfully. "Oh, Norman," she said, "you were going to leave us." "I'm sorry. I was wrong." He started toward her, holding out his hands to her. She swung the spear gun around. "No, you were right. You were right. I want you to leave now." Above her head he saw a glowing monitor, the numbers clicking inexorably backward. 827, 826. He thought, I can change this. I want the numbers to stop counting. The numbers did not stop. "You can't fight me, Norman," she said, huddled in the corner. Her eyes blazed with furious energy. "I can see that. There isn't much time, Norman. I want you to leave." She held the gun pointed firmly toward him. He had a sudden sense of the absurdity of it all, that he had come back to rescue someone who didn't want to be rescued. What could he do now? Beth was wedged back in there, beyond his reach, beyond his help. There was barely enough time for him to get away, let alone to take Harry. Harry, he thought suddenly. Where was Harry now? I want Harry to help me. But he wondered if there was time. The numbers were clicking backward. There was hardly more than 8 minutes now. "I came back for you, Beth." "Go," she said. "Go now, Norman." "But Beth—" "No, Norman. I mean it. Go. Why don't you go?" And then she began to get suspicious. She started to look around, and at that moment Harry stood up behind her and swung the big wrench down on her head, and there was a sickening thud, and she fell. "Did I kill her?" Harry said, and the deep male voice said, "Attention, please. 8 minutes and counting." They ran for the airlock. "How much time is left?" Harry said. They were in the A-Sil airlock trying to put the suit on Beth. She was groaning. Blood was matted on the back of her head. Beth struggled a little, making it more difficult. "Jesus, Beth. How much time, Norman?" 7.5 minutes, maybe less. Her legs were in. They quickly pushed her arms in, zipped up the chest. They turned on her air. Norman helped Harry with his suit. "Attention, please. 7 minutes and counting." Harry said, "How much time you figure to get to the surface?" 2.5 minutes after we get inside the sub, Norman said. "Great." Norman snapped Harry's helmet locked. "Let's go." Harry descended into the water, and Norman lowered Beth's unconscious body. She was heavy with the tank and weights. "Come on, Norman." Norman plunged into the water. At the submarine, Norman climbed up to the hatch entrance, but the untethered sub rolled unpredictably with his weight. Harry, standing on the bottom, tried to push Beth up toward him, but she kept bending over at the waist. Norman, grabbing for her, fell off the sub and slid to the bottom. "Attention, please. 6 minutes and counting." "Hurry, Norman. 6 minutes." "I heard, damn it." Norman finally caught Beth's air hose in his hand, just behind the helmet. He wondered if it would pull out, but he had to risk it. Gripping the hose, he hauled Beth up until she lay on her back on the top of the sub. Then he eased her down into the hatch. 429. 428. Harry was counting. Norman had trouble keeping his balance. He got one of Beth's legs into the hatch, but the other knee was bent, jammed against the lip of the hatch. 416. 415. Would you stop counting and do something? Harry pressed his body against the side of the submarine, countering the rolling with his weight. Norman leaned forward and pressed Beth's knees straight. She slid easily into the open hatch. Norman clambered in after her. It was a one-man airlock, but Beth was unconscious and could not work the controls. He would have to do it for her. "Attention, please. 4 minutes and counting." He was cramped in the airlock, his body pressed up against Beth, chest to chest, her helmet banging against his. With difficulty, he pulled the hatch closed over his head. He blew out the water in a furious rush of compressed air. Unsupported by the water, Beth's body now sagged heavily against him. He reached around her for the handle to the inner hatch. Beth's body blocked his way. He tried to twist her around sideways. In the confined space, he couldn't get any leverage on the body. The whole submarine began to sway. Harry was climbing up the side. "What the hell is going on in there? Harry, will you shut up? Well, what's the delay?" Norman's hand closed on the inner latch handle. He shoved it down, but the door didn't move. The door was hinged to swing inward. He couldn't open it with Beth in the hatch with him. It was too crowded. Her body blocked the movement of the door. "Harry, we got a problem. 3 minutes 30. Norman began to sweat. They were really in trouble now. "Harry, I've got to pass her out to you and go in alone." Norman flooded the airlock, opened the upper latch once again. Harry's balance atop the submarine was precarious. He grabbed Beth by the air hose, dragged her up. Norman reached up to close the hatch. "Attention, please. 2 minutes and counting." He was inside the submarine. The instruments glowed green. He opened the inner hatch. "Norman, try and get her down," Norman said. "Do it as fast as you can." But he was thinking they were in terrible trouble. At least 30 seconds to get Beth into the hatch, and 30 seconds more for Harry to come down. A minute altogether. "She's in. Vent it." Norman jumped for the air vent, blew out the water. "How'd you get her in so fast, Harry?" "Nature's way," Harry said. "To get people through tight spaces." And before Norman could ask what that meant, he had opened the hatch and saw that Harry had pushed Beth into the airlock head first. He grabbed her shoulders and eased her onto the floor of the submarine, then slammed the hatch shut. Moments later, he heard the blast of air as Harry, too, vented the airlock. Norman awoke to see a brilliant shaft of light streaming through the single porthole, shining down on the chemical toilet in the corner of the decompression chamber. He lay on his bunk and looked around the chamber, a horizontal cylinder 50 feet long. Bunks, a metal table, and chairs in the center of the cylinder. Toilet behind a small partition. Harry snored on the bunk above him. Across the decompression chamber, Beth slept, one arm flung over her face. Faintly from a distance, he heard men shouting. Norman yawned and swung off the bunk. His body was sore, but he was otherwise all right. He walked to the shining porthole and looked out, squinting in the bright Pacific sun. He saw the rear deck of the research ship John Hawes. The white helicopter pad, heavy coiled cables, the tubular metal frame of an underwater robot. A Navy crew was lowering a second robot over the side, with a lot of shouting and swearing and waving of hands. Norman had heard their voices faintly through the thick steel walls of the chamber. "What are we going to tell them?" Beth said. It was several hours later. Beth and Harry had awakened, and now they were all sitting around the scarred metal table. None of them had made any attempt to talk to the crew outside. It was, Norman thought, as if they shared an unspoken agreement to remain in isolation a while longer. "I think we'll have to tell them everything," Harry said. "I don't think we should," Norman said. He was surprised by the strength of his conviction, the firmness of his own voice. "I agree," Beth said. "I'm not sure the world is ready for that sphere. I certainly wasn't." She gave Norman a sheepish look. He put his hand on her shoulder. "That's fine," Harry said. "But look at it from the standpoint of the Navy. The Navy has mounted a large and expensive operation. 5 people have died and 2 habitats have been destroyed. They're going to want answers. They're going to keep asking until they get them." "We can refuse to talk," Beth said. "That won't make any difference," Harry said. "Remember, the Navy has all the tapes." "That's right, the tapes," Norman said. He had forgotten about the videotapes they had brought up in the submarine. Dozens of tapes documenting everything that had happened in the habitat during their time underwater. Documenting the squid, the deaths, the sphere, documenting everything. "I think we can prevent them from knowing," Norman said. "How?" Harry said. "We still have the power, don't we?" "I guess so." "And that power," Norman said, "consists of the ability to make anything happen simply by thinking it." "Yes." "Then we can prevent the Navy from knowing. We can decide to forget the whole thing." They fell silent, considering the implications of forgetting the sphere. Because forgetting would not merely prevent the Navy from knowing about the sphere, it would erase all knowledge of it, including their own. Make it vanish from human consciousness as if it had never existed in the first place. "The knowledge will be gone forever," Norman said quietly. He found himself hesitating. Now that they had arrived at this moment, he was strangely reluctant to proceed. He ran his fingertips over the scarred table, touching the surface as if it might provide an answer. In a sense, he thought, all we consist of is memories. Our personalities are constructed from memories. Our lives are organized around memories. Our cultures are built upon the foundation of shared memories that we call history and science. But now, to give up a memory, to give up knowledge, to give up the past. "It's not easy," Harry said, shaking his head. "No," Norman said, "it's not." "Well," Harry said, "I think we have to do it anyway." "I was thinking of Ted," Beth said. And Barnes and the others? We're the only ones who know how they really died, what they gave their lives for. And if we forget, when we forget, Norman said firmly. She has a point, Harry said. If we forget, how do we handle all the details, all the loose ends? I don't think that's a problem, Norman said. The unconscious has tremendous creative powers, as we've seen. The details will be taken care of unconsciously. Even so, Harry said, we still better make the overall decision, because we all have the power. And if we imagine different stories, we'll get confusion. All right, Norman said, let's agree on what happened. Why did we come here? I thought it was going to be an airplane crash. Me too. Okay. Suppose it was an airplane crash. Fine. Well, what happened? The Navy sent some people down to investigate the crash, and a problem developed. Wait a minute, what problem? The squid? No. Better a technical problem. Something to do with a storm? Life support systems failed during the storm? Yes, good. Life support systems failed during the storm. And several people died as a result? Wait a minute. Let's not go so fast. What made the life support systems fail? Beth said, the habitat developed a leak, and seawater corrupted the scrubber canisters in B-Sill, releasing a toxic gas. Could that have happened, Norman said. Yes, easily. And several people died as a result of that accident? Okay. But we survived. Yes. Why, Norman said. We were in the other habitat. Norman shook his head. The other habitat was destroyed too. Maybe it was destroyed later with the explosives. Too complicated, Norman said. Let's keep it simple. It was an accident which happened suddenly and unexpectedly. The habitat sprang a leak and the scrubbers failed. And as a result, most of the people died, but we didn't because we were in the sub? Okay, Norman said. We were in the sub when the systems failed, so we survived and the others didn't. Why were we in the sub? We were transferring the tapes according to the schedule. And what about the tapes, Harry said. What will they show? The tapes will confirm our story, Norman said. Everything will be consistent with the story, including the Navy people who sent us down in the first place, and including us too. We won't remember anything but this story. Beth seemed to think about it longer, biting her lip. But finally she nodded. Okay. Norman took a deep breath and looked at Beth and Harry. Are we ready to forget the sphere and the fact that we once had the power to make things happen by thinking them? They nodded. Okay. On the count of 3. They closed their eyes. 1. With his eyes closed, Norman thought, people always forget that they have power anyway. 2, Harry said. And then Norman focused his mind. With a sudden intensity, he saw the sphere again, shining like a star, perfect and polished. And he thought, I want to forget I ever saw the sphere. And in his mind's eye, the sphere vanished. 3, Harry said. 3 what? Norman said. His eyes ached and burned. He rubbed them with his thumb and forefinger, then opened them. Beth and Harry were sitting around the table in the decompression chamber with him. They all looked tired and depressed. But that was to be expected, he thought, considering what they had all been through. 3 what? Norman said again. Oh, Harry said, I was just thinking out loud. Only 3 of us left. Beth sighed. Norman saw tears in her eyes. She fumbled in her pocket for a Kleenex, blew her nose. You can't blame yourselves, Norman said. It was an accident. There was nothing we could do about it. He got up from the table. They ought to eat, he thought. They ought to have food. I'm going to ask for food. I'm not hungry, Beth said. I know that, but we should eat anyway. Norman walked to the porthole. The attentive Navy crew saw him at once, pressed the radio intercom.
Do anything for you, Dr. Johnson?
Yes, Norman said. We need some food.
Right away, sir.
Norman saw the sympathy on the faces of the Navy crew. These senior men understood what a shock it must be for the 3 survivors.
Dr. Johnson, are you, people ready to talk to somebody now?
Talk?
Yes, sir. Intelligence experts have been reviewing the videotapes from the submarine. They have some questions for you.
What about? Norman asked without much interest.
Well, when you were transferred to the SDC, Dr. Adams mentioned something about a squid.
Did he?
Yes, sir. Only there doesn't seem to be any squid recorded on the tapes.
I don't remember any squid, Norman said, puzzled. He turned to Harry. Did you see something about a squid, Harry? Harry frowned. Squid? I don't think so. Norman turned back to the Navy man. What do the videotapes show exactly?
Well, the tapes go right up to the time when the air in the habitat, you know, the accident.
Yes, Norman said. I remember the accident.
From the tapes, we think we know what happened. Apparently, there was a leak in the habitat wall and the scrubber cylinders got wet. They became inoperable and the ambient atmosphere went bad.
I see.
It must have happened very suddenly, sir.
Yes, Norman said. Yes, it did.
So, are you ready to talk to someone now?
I think so, yes. Norman turned away from the porthole. He put his hands in the pockets of his jacket, felt a piece of paper. He pulled out a picture and stared at it curiously. It was a photograph of a red Corvette. Norman wondered where the picture had come from. Probably a car that belonged to someone else who had worn the jacket before Norman. Probably one of the Navy people who had died in the underwater disaster. Norman shivered, crumpled the picture in his fist, and tossed it into the trash. He didn't need any mementos. He remembered that disaster only too well. He knew he would never forget it for the rest of his life.